Designed in a mere 143 days by Kelly Johnson's legendary Skunk Works team in 1943, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star made history as the very first American jet fighter to enter operational service. First taking flight on January 8, 1944, this innovative aircraft arrived in the skies over Korea at exactly the moment modern aerial warfare underwent a radical transformation. Suddenly, its rigid, straight-wing blueprint became a critical tactical liability when confronting the Soviet MiG-15, whose swept-wing aerodynamics delivered vastly superior performance above 25,000 feet. Yet, Lieutenant Russell Brown's historic downing of a MiG-15 while piloting this technically inferior aircraft remains a masterclass in aerial combat, proving that battlefield outcomes depend on pilot skill far more than technical specification sheets alone. As the swept-wing F-86 Sabre rushed in to claim the air superiority crown, the F-80C was progressively reassigned to punishing ground attack roles. Under relentless pressure, it flew an astonishing 98,515 combat sorties across the Korean theater, recording more combat missions than any other aircraft in the entire conflict, securing its enduring legacy. It proved itself a rugged workhorse in America's first true jet war. Entering service in 1947, the straight-wing Republic F-84 Thunderjet, alongside its 1954 swept-wing successor, the F-84F Thunderstreak, performed a vital, high-stakes strategic role that history often forgets. During the tense early years of the Cold War, these rugged fighter-bombers served as the primary nuclear delivery platform for Strategic Air Command. They filled a critical security gap when the aging B-29 bomber's effectiveness plummeted, holding the line until the advanced B-47 Stratojet could arrive in sufficient numbers. Deployed to the bloody skies of Korea, the F-84 shifted focus to devastating interdiction campaigns. Operating under brutal conditions, Thunderjet units executed an incredible 86,408 combat sorties, utterly decimating enemy infrastructure by destroying 60 locomotives, nearly 4,000 tactical vehicles, and over 8,000 buildings. However, this heavy ground attack mission demanded a terrible price, resulting in the loss of 335 aircraft. Ultimately, production scaled immensely to meet global demand, with 4,457 G models and over 2,000 F models built. A cornerstone of early Western defense, 16 Allied nations proudly operated this fierce, nuclear-capable machine, solidifying Republic Aviation's reputation. First taking flight on October 1st, 1947, and entering full operational service in 1949, the North American F-86 Sabre was urgently rushed to Korea in December 1950 to confront a terrifying new threat. It immediately restored American air superiority over the deadly, contested skies of MiG Alley, eventually becoming the most produced Western jet fighter in aviation history with 9,860 airframes built. The Sabre's iconic 35-degree swept wing utilized advanced German aerodynamic data captured directly from wartime Focke-Wulf designs, meaning both the F-86 and its arch-rival, the Soviet MiG-15, shared a secret engineering lineage rooted in Nazi technology. For decades, the US celebrated a staggering 10-to-1 kill ratio, claiming 792 downed MiGs against only 78 Sabre losses. While subsequent Russian and Chinese military records contested this, suggesting a tighter 2-to-1 reality, both statistics remain accurate, within their own specific accounting rules. Operated by 30 nations globally, the Sabre proved to have astonishing longevity. The final operational F-86 served with the Pakistan Air Force until its retirement in 2007, closing an incredible chapter in combat aviation history. As the world's very first operational production supersonic fighter, the North American F-100 Super Sabre shattered records by achieving sustained supersonic flight in a level attitude without even activating its afterburner. First flying on May 25, 1953, and entering service in 1954, the initial F-100A variant harbored a hidden, deadly flaw, a lethal adverse yaw coupling that could trigger an unrecoverable deep stall at high angles of attack. Before engineers successfully redesigned the vertical fin, 47 early aircraft were completely lost to this terrifying condition. Decades later, the skies over Vietnam became the Super Sabre's true crucible. It flew an astonishing 360,283 combat sorties, more than any other American aircraft in that grueling conflict, primarily providing devastating close air support to ground troops. However, operating in high-threat environments came at a terrible cost, as 198 Super Sabres were lost to enemy fire. An aircraft originally engineered to be the ultimate supersonic MiG killer ended its legendary operational career as a heavily battered, low-altitude bomb truck supporting frontline ground forces. Originally envisioned as a long-range strategic escort to protect nuclear bombers deep inside hostile territory, the heavy McDonnell F-101 Voodoo was dynamically resurrected as a supersonic interceptor. With 807 total airframes produced, this muscular twin-engine machine carried one of the most terrifying weapons of the Cold War, the AIR-2 Genie nuclear rocket. This unguided projectile carried a 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead, engineered to be launched directly into the center of incoming Soviet strategic bomber formations to vaporize entire fleets at once. Beyond its interceptor role, the Voodoo secured an unforgettable place in intelligence history through its reconnaissance variants. Following the sudden suspension of high-altitude U-2 spy flights, the RF-101C was thrust into danger, flying the first perilous low-level reconnaissance missions over Cuba during the terrifying missile crisis of October 1962. Streaking across enemy airspace at treetop level, these daring reconnaissance pilots brought back high-resolution imagery that provided crucial, close-in visual confirmation of Soviet nuclear missile sites, giving President Kennedy the undeniable proof required to alter the course of modern global history. The Convair F-102 Delta Dagger stands as a profound testament to how theoretical physics can rescue an endangered military program. In initial flight testing, the radical Delta Wing aircraft utterly failed to break the sound barrier in level flight, leaving the entire project on the brink of cancellation. The YF-102 prototype was frustratingly subsonic, until legendary NACA aerodynamicist Richard Whitcomb applied his revolutionary area rule principle to the design in 1952. By narrowing the fuselage to give it an iconic wasp waist shape, drag was drastically reduced. The dramatically redesigned F-102A easily exceeded Mach 1.2, turning a wind tunnel theory into a multi-billion-dollar aviation triumph. However, its actual combat deployment revealed stark limitations. During patrol missions in the dense skies over Vietnam, 2 F-102A interceptors were abruptly shot down by nimble North Vietnamese MiG-21s. It was a humiliating indignity for a sophisticated aircraft specifically engineered for high-altitude interception, only to be assigned routine combat patrols and ultimately bested by a significantly faster, far more maneuverable opponent that exposed the dagger's technical vulnerabilities in close dogfights. Born from direct conversations with veteran combat pilots during the Korean War, the Lockheed F-104 starfighter was engineered around a simple, uncompromising desire: a small, lightweight airframe with unmatched speed and climb rates. Kelly Johnson's design team achieved these blistering supersonic goals perfectly, but the narrow operational focus created terrifying consequences on the ground. The West German Luftwaffe infamously lost 292 of their F-104G models to catastrophic training accidents. This staggering 32% airframe loss rate earned the sleek jet a grim, permanent nickname across Europe: the Widowmaker. Tragically, 116 Luftwaffe pilots lost their lives in these non-combat mishaps. The core issue was systemic. The high-speed interceptor was the perfect design for a single specialized mission, yet it was repeatedly forced into 5 alternative tactical roles it was never meant to handle. Despite this notorious reputation, other global operators mastered the unforgiving machine. The Italian Air Force successfully flew updated F-104S variants until 2004, marking an incredible 46 years of operational life for a radical jet that pushed aviation engineering to its absolute limits. Purpose-built as a massive supersonic internal bay nuclear strike aircraft, the Republic F-105. Thunder Chief first took flight on October 22, 1955, and entered operational service in 1958. However, instead of launching nuclear weapons against strategic targets, the heavy jet was pressed into a grueling, conventional bombing campaign over the deadly skies of North Vietnam. In this relentless conflict, the Thunder Chief suffered more combat losses than any other American aircraft type in history. An astonishing 334 F-105s were completely destroyed by enemy anti-aircraft fire and surface-to-air missiles, representing a devastating 27.5% of the entire production run of 833 airframes. Yet, despite these staggering losses, the Thunder Chief birthed a legendary tactical legacy. Specialized twin-seat F-105F and G Wild Weasel variants pioneered the dangerous art of suppression of enemy air defenses. Hunting down hostile radar sites and surface-to-air missile batteries, these courageous crews established a permanent, highly specialized mission profile that remains a vital cornerstone of modern American air power to this very day on the front lines. First flying on December 26, 1956, and entering operational service in 1959, the Convair F-106 Delta Dart represents the absolute zenith of the dedicated American interceptor. Boasting blistering Mach 2.31 performance, this sleek Delta wing machine remained in continuous frontline service through 1988. It was the most capable dedicated interceptor the United States ever built, and notably the last American fighter, whose design requirements assumed that hunting Soviet nuclear bombers was its sole mission. Yet, despite its formidable capabilities, the Delta Dart never saw a single moment of actual combat. The massive Soviet strategic bomber force it was precisely engineered to destroy was rapidly superseded by intercontinental ballistic missiles, threats whose soaring trajectories the F-106 could never touch. In a poetic and tragic end, several of these magnificent interceptors were ultimately converted into unmanned QF-106 target drones. They were deliberately blown out of the sky during live fire testing, meaning the ultimate bomber killer was destined to be destroyed by the very air-to-air missiles it was originally designed to launch, leaving a legacy defined entirely by unfulfilled potential. When the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II first flew on May 27, 1958, it was a radical departure from tradition. Engineered completely without an internal gun, military doctrine of the era confidently dictated that advanced air-to-air guided missiles had made close-range dogfighting entirely obsolete. Produced in a staggering 5,195 airframes across 13 specialized variants, the heavy fighter was thrust into Vietnam, where it quickly demonstrated that American tactics were optimized for a war that wasn't actually being fought. In response to dismal missile performance and mounting losses, the United States Navy established the legendary Top Gun training program in 1969. Navy Phantom kill ratios against nimble North Vietnamese MiGs instantly doubled after this rigorous tactical training became widespread. The aircraft itself had not changed, but the combat tactics radically shifted. Recognizing the harsh lessons of real-world air combat, the Air Force introduced the F-4E variant in 1967, which integrated an internal M61 Vulcan 20mm rotary cannon, permanently acknowledging what the bloody skies over Vietnam had brutally proven to a generation of pilots. First flying on March 25, 1955, and entering service in 1957, the Volt F-8 Crusader arrived as the United States Navy's very first supersonic carrier-capable aircraft. As the Vietnam War escalated, the Crusader quickly emerged as the Navy's absolute preferred dogfighter precisely because it proudly retained the four 20mm internal cannons that the newer F-4 Phantom had completely discarded. Grateful aviators affectionately dubbed it the last of the gunfighters. The F-8's exceptional combat record in Southeast Asia, 19 confirmed aerial victories against a mere 4 losses, represented the single highest kill ratio of any Navy aircraft in the entire conflict. Beyond American carrier decks, the rugged Crusader achieved remarkable global longevity. France's Aeronavale eagerly operated specialized F-8 variants from their own aircraft carriers from 1964 all the way through the year 2000, achieving a phenomenal 36-year naval service life. Long after the Crusader had been fully phased out of frontline American service, it simultaneously remained the absolute cornerstone of French naval aviation, proving the timeless value of a pure, gun-armed fighter machine. Engineered from the ground up as a simple, highly maintainable and low-cost supersonic fighter for export to global allies, the Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter first took flight on July 30th, 1959. Eventually delivered to over 40 nations across more than 2,600 total airframes, the sleek F-5 perfectly filled the critical operational gap between advanced jet trainers and complex frontline combat aircraft in Allied inventories. Yet, the F-5's most profoundly consequential American operator was not a combat unit, but rather the United States Navy's elite adversary and aggressor squadrons. Because of its small visual signature and nimble flight characteristics, the F-5E Tiger II was utilized as an incredibly realistic surrogate for the Soviet MiG-21 at the famous Top Gun school. Instructors pushed the agile jet to its limits, teaching generations of American naval aviators how to survive and win against Soviet hardware. Ultimately, the F-5's immense tactical value as a dedicated aggressor training aircraft far outlasted its utility as a frontline American fighter, cementing its place in military history. First flying on December 21st, 1970, and entering active carrier service in 1974, the Grumman F-14 Tomcat was a technological tour de force. It became the first operational aircraft in aviation history capable of simultaneously tracking 24 airborne targets and engaging 6 of them at extreme ranges using its revolutionary AWG-9 radar and long-range AIM-54 Phoenix missile combination. The twin-engine variable sweep fighter was the Navy's ultimate shield against aggressive Soviet anti-carrier doctrine, designed to destroy incoming bombers before they could launch devastating anti-ship missiles. While the Tomcat's iconic Hollywood status in the 1986 film Top Gun cemented its pop culture fame, its actual operational record was remarkably diverse. It scored 2 aerial victories over Libya in 1981 and flew extensive precision strike missions over Iraq and Afghanistan using advanced Lantern pods. Strikingly, Iran received 79 F-14As before the 1979 revolution, and some remain operational today. To prevent vital spare parts from ever reaching Tehran, the United States military completely shredded every single retired F-14D airframe after its retirement in September 2006. Forged directly from the harsh aerial lessons of the Vietnam War, the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle first took flight on July 27, 1972, entering operational service in 1976 with an absolute mandate: undisputed air superiority. Over the next 4 decades, the Eagle compiled an unmatched aerial combat record with absolutely no precedent in aviation history. Across Israeli, Saudi, and American operators, the F-15 has achieved 104 confirmed air-to-air victories with exactly 0 combat losses. Not a single F-15 has ever been downed by an opposing aircraft in over 48 years of active combat operations. The Israeli Air Force alone accumulated 67 confirmed kills during intense operations over Lebanon and Syria between 1979 and 1982, famously including 5 high-speed Syrian MiG-25s. Later, during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, American F-15C pilots utterly dominated the skies, destroying 37 Iraqi aircraft without suffering a single air-to-air casualty. The Eagle's flawless record remains a towering testament to unmatched aerodynamic engineering, superior pilot training, and absolute battlefield dominance that has never been equaled. First flying on December 11, 1986, and entering frontline service in 1988 with the historic 4th Tactical Fighter Wing, the McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle fundamentally transformed the Eagle platform. It dramatically expanded the aircraft from a pure air superiority fighter into a lethal, dual-role combat juggernaut, capable of carrying a massive 23,000-pound payload, the largest of any tactical fighter in the United States Air Force inventory. It simultaneously retained its full, lethal air-to-air combat capability. The evolution continued in 2021 with the introduction of the advanced F-15EX Eagle II, boasting a phenomenal 20,000-hour airframe life and cutting-edge AESA radar. The Eagle-2 is slated to serve well into the 2040s alongside stealth assets like the F-35, reinforcing a powerful strategic argument. A non-stealthy, heavily armed strike aircraft possessing an enormous weapons payload offers immense operational utility that an invisible stealth fighter, restricted to small internal weapon bays, simply cannot replicate, ensuring the legendary Eagle lineage remains vital for decades to come in global hotspots. Emerging as the victorious design in the high-stakes 1974 lightweight fighter competition, the General Dynamics F-16. Fighting Falcon first took flight on January 20th, 1974, and entered active Air Force service in 1979. Produced in over 4,600 airframes for more than 25 international nations, the iconic Falcon became the most built Western fighter aircraft since the legendary F-86 Sabre. Its revolutionary design aggressively prioritized agility, introducing fly-by-wire technology and a blended wing body that optimized maneuvering performance over all other characteristics. In combat, the Israeli Air Force alone accumulated an astonishing 76 confirmed F-16 aerial victories. Globally, the F-16 has fired more AEM-120 AIMRAAM missiles in actual combat than any other aircraft type in aviation history. Today, the modern F-16V Viper variant, heavily upgraded with an advanced APG-83A ESA radar, provides fourth-generation airframes with sophisticated sensor capabilities that closely approach fifth-generation stealth performance. It offers a highly lethal, battle-tested solution at a mere fraction of the operational cost of newer stealth alternatives worldwide. Derived from the athletic Northrop YF-17 prototype, the McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet first took flight on November 18, 1978, officially entering carrier-based naval service in 1984. This innovative aircraft proudly created the unique F/A dual-role designation, an acronym that perfectly expressed the core design innovation. An agile machine that could instantly switch between fighter and attack missions at the press of a cockpit button without requiring any physical reconfiguration. On January 17, 1991, during the opening hours of Operation Desert Storm, Lieutenant Commander Mark Fox of Squadron Phi FA-81 demonstrated this unprecedented capability flawlessly. While streaking toward his designated ground target, he intercepted and shot down two Iraqi MiG-21s using guided AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, immediately adjusted his sensors, and seamlessly continued his run to drop his heavy bomb payload directly on target. No other tactical combat aircraft in aviation history had ever achieved both aerial kills and a precision bomb strike on a single combat mission, forever validating the multi-mission strike fighter concept across the entire globe. Despite sharing the familiar Hornet name, the Boeing F/A-18E and F Super Hornet is an almost completely new and far more capable combat aircraft. Entering fleet service in 1999, it is 25% larger, features 30% greater operational range, and boasts completely redesigned engine intakes and wing geometry. The Super Hornet rapidly became the United States Navy's primary carrier-based strike asset following the F-14 Tomcat's retirement in 2006. It ascended to this vital role by default, stepping in to fill a massive capability gap left when the ambitious A-12 Avenger II stealth program was abruptly terminated in 1991 after $5 billion in expenditure produced zero flying prototypes. Today, The latest Block 3 Super Hornet variants extend the heavy fighter's combat relevance well into the 2030s, operating seamlessly alongside the advanced F-35C. The long, successful career of the Super Hornet proves that an urgent, expedient solution designed to rescue a cancelled procurement program can ultimately become the undisputed backbone of a superpower's naval power for over 30 years. The Northrop and McDonnell Douglas YF-23 Black Widow too represents one of the greatest what-if sagas in aviation history. Built as the direct competitor in the United States Air Force's high-stakes advanced tactical fighter competition, the exotic YF-23 ultimately lost to the Lockheed YF-22 on April 23, 1991. Aviation experts and historians generally assess that the radical Northrop design actually demonstrated vastly superior supercruise speed and significantly better stealth characteristics than its winning rival, yet it was ultimately rejected by military leadership in favor of the more conventional YF-22. Today, the only two existing YF-23 prototypes, nicknamed Black Widow 2 and Grey Ghost, sit silently as museum pieces preserved forever at the Western Museum of Flight and the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Neither of these breathtaking, futuristic machines will ever take to the skies again. An aircraft that may have been aerodynamically superior in crucial performance dimensions became a historic relic, while its rival evolved into the F-22 Raptor, defining the future of American air dominance. First flying on September 7, 1997, and achieving initial operational capability in December 2005, the Lockheed Martin F-22A Raptor is widely recognized as the most dominant air superiority fighter ever engineered, boasting an incredible ability to supercruise at Mach 1.5 without using afterburners. Its advanced radar cross-section is smaller than a steel marble. In simulated air-to-air combat exercises against capable fourth-generation fighters, the Raptor regularly delivers staggering kill ratios exceeding 10-1. Yet, political calculations severely truncated the program, halting production at just 187 airframes out of the 648 originally planned due to a massive $334 million unit flyaway cost. Ironically, the Raptor's first actual combat mission didn't happen in a dogfight, but on September 22, 2014, when it dropped GPS-guided bombs onto ISIS targets in Syria. The world's most advanced air superiority fighter was deployed against an insurgent enemy with zero air force and absolutely no radar capabilities. To this day, not a single F-22 Raptor has ever been lost to hostile enemy action anywhere on Earth. Representing the most expensive defense procurement program in American history, the Lockheed Martin F-35. Lightning II carries an astronomical estimated lifetime program cost of $1.7 trillion. First flying on December 15, 2006, and achieving initial operational capability in 2015, over 1,000 aircraft have been delivered across 17 allied nations. The complex program mandated a single universal airframe design to simultaneously serve three distinct branches: a conventional fighter for the Air Force, a short takeoff and vertical landing variant for the Marine Corps, and a carrier-capable catapult asset for the Navy. In battle, the Israeli Air Force's specialized F-35 Ayadir made history on May 22, 2018, becoming the first stealth fighter used in active combat by striking targets in Syria without triggering advanced Syrian or Russian radar systems. While unit costs initially peaked at $400 million, optimization dropped the price below $80 million. The F-35 proved its ultimate value lies not in a single specialized mission, but in the terrifying aggregate effect of an adversary completely unable to predict when they are being watched, targeted, or struck. In the opening moves of the Cold War, Washington faced a terrifying reality: a massive, closed Soviet empire with completely hidden nuclear capabilities. To pierce this iron curtain, the US turned to the legendary B-29 bomber, stripping its weapons to create the RB-29 and later the RB-50. These modified platforms carried advanced K-17C mapping cameras, charting 40-kilometer-wide strips from 31,000 feet. Flying on the razor's edge of international law, these brave crews mapped the high-stakes targets for SAC's emergency nuclear war plans. But mapping the Soviet heartland carried a lethal price. On April 8, 1950, Soviet Le-11 fighters intercepted an RB-29 over the Baltic Sea, blasting it out of the sky and killing all 10 crewmen. To prevent a catastrophic diplomatic escalation, the United States government chose absolute silence. No public protests were filed, no press releases were issued, and grieving families were told only that their loved ones died on routine training missions. Later variants added electronic intelligence systems to detect hidden radar networks, tracking a secret war of attrition. Their sacrifices remained locked away in classified vaults for decades. As the 1950s dawned, the United States required an aerial Leviathan capable of reaching deep into the Soviet heartland without relying on fragile overseas bases. Enter the Convair RB-36 Peacemaker, a Colossus modified from America's premier strategic bomber. Armed with 14 cameras, including the massive T11 23-lens mapping set, this behemoth could photograph an astonishing 350,000 square miles of hostile terrain on a single mission. Operating from the continental United States, it possessed an unmatched, unrefueled intercontinental range of nearly 10,000 nautical miles. Inside this flying fortress, a massive 22-man crew, the largest ever deployed on a reconnaissance aircraft, toiled in a deeply compartmentalized environment, moving between pressurized sections via an internal tunnel. Flying perilous peripheral routes along Alaska and the United Kingdom, they legally captured invaluable high-resolution imagery of Soviet targets without ever technically violating Soviet airspace. This provided Washington with supreme diplomatic deniability alongside critical targeting data. Though eventually phased out by 1959 due to the arrival of high-altitude U-2 spy planes and agile jet interceptors, the legendary RB-36 ruled the skies during a dangerous era of intelligence gathering when speed and sheer scale mattered most. Its immense size symbolized the absolute desperation of early Cold War deterrence. The dawn of the jet age brought an entirely new weapon to the intelligence war: the North American RB-45C Tornado. Entering service in 1950, this variant of America's first operational jet bomber shattered previous reconnaissance limitations. On April 9, 1950, it executed the first confirmed American jet overflight of Soviet territory, racing through a 1,200-kilometer swath of hostile airspace. Traveling at a blistering 570 miles per hour, the Tornado initially outran piston engine interceptors, but its 40,000-foot ceiling soon became vulnerable to the deadly new Soviet MiG-15. To bypass geopolitical landmines, a secret agreement was struck in 1952. Royal Air Force crews began flying these American jets, covertly scrubbing off US military insignia and applying British roundels. This brilliant deception provided absolute deniability for both nations while capturing critical photographs used to update American nuclear strike packages. The Tornado also saw intense combat during the Korean War, pioneering hazardous night reconnaissance operations using high-intensity flash bombs to illuminate enemy targets. Retired in 1958, this unsung jet trailblazer proved vital to Western intelligence, yet its highly classified overflights remained hidden from the public eye until 2005. Today, not a single intact example of this historic aircraft survives anywhere on Earth. When war erupted across the Korean Peninsula in 1950, battlefield intelligence quickly became a matter of life and death. Ground commanders desperately needed immediate, accurate eyes in the sky, and they found them in the Lockheed RF-80A Shooting Star. This tactical jet reconnaissance aircraft featured a uniquely modified nose bay, replacing heavy machine guns with 3 sophisticated K-17 cameras capable of capturing vertical, forward, and oblique angles. Flying over 7,000 grueling combat sorties, the RF-80A served as the primary tactical reconnaissance platform throughout the first year of the conflict. But danger intensified dramatically in November 1950 with the sudden appearance of the Soviet-built MiG-15 jet interceptor. RF-80A pilots operating along the high-risk Yalu River now faced a terrifying reality: enemy jets that could intercept them at any altitude. Despite mounting losses and immense danger, the Shooting Star maintained an ingenious operational advantage. Its camera nose was completely interchangeable with standard fighter gun noses under primitive field conditions. This unique capability provided unmatched tactical flexibility that later purpose-built reconnaissance programs would abandon. Though eventually replaced by faster aircraft, the RF-80A secured a vital legacy in early jet combat history. Its camera lenses captured the brutal reality of a shifting global conflict. By the mid-1950s, the Cold War intelligence gap threatened American survival. To pierce Soviet secrecy, Kelly Johnson's brilliant Skunk Works team designed a revolutionary high-altitude aircraft in just 88 days, the Lockheed U-2. Operating under the CIA's highly classified Project Aquatone, this fragile powered glider flew at an unthinkable 70,000 feet, far above estimated Soviet air defenses. Equipped with a state-of-the-art Hikon B camera, its 36-inch focal length captured mind-boggling images from the edge of space, resolving objects just 2.5 feet across. Between 1956 and 1960, 24 daring overflights mapping bomber bases and missile sites transformed American strategic intelligence. However, the CIA's assumption of absolute invulnerability proved short-lived. Soviet radar tracked every mission, and their air defenses rapidly improved. On May Day, 1960, a volley of advanced SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles erupted over Sverdlovsk, tearing pilot Francis Gary Powers' U-2 from the sky. Powers survived, but his public capture ignited a massive geopolitical firestorm that abruptly ended the overflight program. Even as upgraded U-2C variants arrived with powerful new engines, the illusion of an untouchable spy plane was shattered forever, rewriting history. The golden age of direct, unhindered overflights had officially come to a dramatic and definitive end. Some weapons designs are so fundamentally brilliant that they simply refuse to die. While the original U-2 was shattered by Soviet missiles, its successor arose as a vastly superior beast. Entering service in 1968, the Lockheed U-2R was a completely redesigned aircraft standing a massive 40% larger than its predecessor. By 1994, this legendary airframe was re-engined to the U-2S standard, integrating the highly efficient General Electric F118 turbofan engine. This powerhouse added 17,000 pounds of thrust, pushing the spy plane past 80,000 feet. Decades after spy satellites were predicted to make it completely obsolete, the U-2S continues to endure. Carrying advanced optical bar cameras, synthetic aperture radar systems, and cutting-edge digital data links, it transmits near real-time intelligence directly to battlefield commanders. The platform proved its supreme tactical worth during Operation Desert Storm, guiding ground troops with unmatched precision. Remarkably, the United States Air Force has attempted to retire this aging workhorse at least 4 separate occasions since 1990. Each time, unmanned drone alternatives failed to match its incredible payload capability. As a result, this iconic 68-year-old design remains flying active frontline missions well into the 21st century. It is an unyielding testament to classic, unmatched Cold War engineering. During the tense climax of the late Cold War, Europe stood as a hair-trigger tripwire for World War III. To counter a massive Soviet armored blitzkrieg, the Air Force deployed a specialized theater surveillance variant of the U-2R airframe, the Lockheed TR-1A. Entering active service in 1981 with the 17th Reconnaissance Wing at RAF Alconbury, 37 of these specialized aircraft were built to dominate a unique mission. Instead of strategic deep penetration photography, the TR-1A utilized the cutting-edge UPD-X side-looking airborne radar, alongside the highly classified Precision Location Strike System. Cruising safely within international airspace over West Germany, its high-tech sensors peered deep across the inter-German border. It provided NATO ground commanders with real-time tracking of Warsaw-packed tank and motor rifle divisions. The sophisticated tracking system geolocated Soviet artillery and air defense radars with pinpoint accuracy, feeding coordinates instantly to American strike aircraft. Though the intense electronic chaos of a real European land battle was fortunately never tested, the TR-1A proved remarkably successful. In October 1992, the fleet was structurally consolidated, losing its tactical designation to be absorbed back into the universal U-2R fleet standard, leaving a highly focused legacy. It stood as a silent sentinel over a divided Europe. Deep within the top-secret confines of Area 51, visionary designer Kelly Johnson engineered the absolute pinnacle of high-speed espionage, the Lockheed A-12 Oxcart. First taking flight in 1962, this CIA-operated Phantom was the fastest operational aircraft ever created, sustaining a mind-melting cruise of Mach 3.35 at 95,000 feet. At these extreme velocities, aerodynamic friction heated the outer skin to a blistering 316 degrees Celsius, stretching the titanium hull 11 inches in mid-flight. Ironically, the CIA used front companies to covertly purchase the required raw titanium directly from the Soviet Union, unknowingly tricking America's greatest adversary into building the very spy plane designed to monitor them. Operating under Project Black Shield over North Vietnam, a single Oxcart mapped a 72-mile-wide swath from the Chinese border down to the DMZ, uncovering dozens of hidden SA-2 surface-to-air missile installations. Yet, despite its flawless operational record and superior speed margin, political infighting sealed its fate. In June 1968, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara abruptly cancelled the program to cut costs, choosing to preserve the Air Force's SR-71 fleet instead. To maintain absolute secrecy, 6 irreplaceable ox-cart airframes were completely destroyed, burying a legendary achievement. The remaining survivors stayed locked in secret hangars for decades. In the hyper-classified world of Cold War aviation, the best way to hide a multi-billion-dollar secret program is right in plain sight. Enter the Lockheed YF-12A developed from the CIA's super-secret A-12 Oxcart. This lethal Mach 3 interceptor prototype was publicly unveiled by President Lyndon Johnson in February 1964. But this public reveal was a calculated illusion. The YF-12A's primary mission was to serve as a highly visible cover story, deflecting global and congressional attention away from the active, top-secret A-12 spy missions operating out of Area 51. Despite its deceptive role, the YF-12A was an absolute powerhouse, setting 6 absolute world speed and altitude records by sustaining an astonishing 270 miles per hour. It boasted the advanced Hughes pulse Doppler radar and 3 internal bays armed with devastating AIM-47A air-to-air missiles. Every single live test firing successfully obliterated its target drone. Though Defense Secretary McNamara terminated the interceptor program in 1968 on strict budget grounds, its technological DNA survived. The AIM-47 missile design was directly transferred to power the iconic F-14 Tomcat's Phoenix missile system, ensuring this legendary, record-shattering cover story left an indelible mark on military history. It proved that deception can be a weapon just as potent as speed. While other spy planes sought safety in extreme altitude, one legendary machine achieved invulnerability through pure, unadulterated speed: the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird. Operating from Beale Air Force Base beginning in 1968, this sleek Black Phantom flew over 3,500 operational sorties through the absolute height of the Cold War. Powered by 2 revolutionary Pratt & Whitney J58 hybrid ramjet turbines, the Blackbird sustained an incredible cruise speed beyond Mach 3.2. Whenever hostile nations fired surface-to-air missiles, the SR-71's standard tactical response was beautifully simple: accelerate. Covering a mile every 1.7 seconds, it completely outran over 4,000 enemy missiles. Not a single Blackbird was ever hit in 22 years of dangerous frontline deployment. Despite this legendary combat record, the Air Force retired the fleet in 1990 to cut soaring budgets. However, a critical intelligence gap quickly forced Congress to reactivate the aircraft in 1995, proving that satellite imagery still lacked the responsive, on-demand capabilities of the Blackbird. Though permanently retired in 1998, when budget arguments finally won out, the SR-71 Blackbird remains an undefeated king of the skies, an engineering masterpiece that has never been truly replaced by any nation. Its unmatched legacy continues to captivate aviation enthusiasts and historians worldwide. Taming a titanium beast flying at Mach 3 requires elite pilots with nerves of absolute steel. To train this highly exclusive fraternity, the Air Force deployed the 2-seat SR-71B and SR-71C operational trainers. Featuring a distinctly raised rear cockpit to provide the instructor with essential forward visibility, these unique aircraft formed the vital backbone of the 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing's training infrastructure. Throughout the entire history of the program, only about 20 elite pilots ever fully qualified to fly the operational Blackbird. meaning the US military's entire Mach 3 reconnaissance capability rested on just 6 to 8 active crews at any given time. Transitioning into the Blackbird required completely relearning how to fly. Trainees had to manage high landing speeds of 175 knots, immense fuel consumption during ground run-ups, and an unstable longitudinal balance at cruise altitudes. While the two B models were purpose-built, the solitary SR-71C was an ingenious hybrid, built from the salvaged aft fuselage of a crashed YF-12A interceptor and an active SR-71A nose. Nicknamed the Bastard, it flew until retirement, securing its place alongside its sister trainers as the unsung guardians of the Blackbird legend. Without these trainers, the Blackbird program could never have flown. At the height of the Cold War, the United States attempted to eliminate human risk from high-stakes espionage through a radical project, the Lockheed D-21 drone. Launched from an M21 carrier aircraft at Mach 3.2, this pre-programmed unmanned vehicle was built to zoom over heavily defended Chinese nuclear test sites, eject a film capsule, and self-destruct. Codenamed Project Tagboard, the program suffered an immediate tragedy on July 30th, 1966, when a drone collided with its mothership during launch, destroying both vehicles and killing Launch Control Officer Ray Torek. Shifting to B-52 pylon launches under Project Senior Bowl, the D-21 flew 4 real-world operational missions over China's remote Lop Nur test site. Every single mission failed. Capsules sank into the ocean, suffered severe water damage, or vanished entirely. Most disastrously, one drone crashed deep inside China, allowing hostile engineers to harvest its advanced stealth and ramjet technologies before sharing them directly with the Soviet Union. Ironically, the D-21 yielded far more intelligence for America's enemies than it ever did for Washington. Cancelled in July 1971, this highly ambitious multi-million-dollar program remains a sobering reminder of the technological limitations of early robotic warfare. Its remains are split across global museums today. In October 1962, the world stood suspended over the terrifying abyss of total nuclear annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis was unfolding, and President John F. Kennedy desperately needed definitive, undeniable proof of Soviet treachery. To get it, the US deployed the McDonnell RF-101C Voodoo, modified with a specialized nose completely packed with high-resolution cameras. These supersonic jets roared over Cuba at a hair-raising altitude of just 500 feet. Cloud cover had blinded high-flying U-2 spy planes, but the low-level Voodoo pilots captured crystal-clear photographs of Soviet R-12 ballistic missile launchers being actively assembled at San Cristobal. These historic images provided the visual evidence that transformed analytical speculation into terrifying certainty, enabling Kennedy to confront the Soviet Union before the United Nations Security Council. The Voodoo later served under immense danger during the Vietnam War from 1961 to 1970. While its impressive Mach 1.72 speed could outrun enemy MiG-17 fighters, it was highly vulnerable to deadly North Vietnamese anti-aircraft artillery and SA-2 missiles, resulting in 19 combat losses. Replaced by the RF-4C Phantom, the Voodoo secured an immortal legacy as the aircraft that unmasked a hidden nuclear threat. Its actions single-handedly changed the entire course of human history forever. Amidst the dense, flak-choked skies of the Vietnam War, one unarmed aircraft flew more frontline missions than any other reconnaissance platform, the McDonnell Douglas RF-4C Phantom II. Entering active service in 1965, this specialized variant became the ultimate tactical eye for the United States Air Force. Flying an astonishing 83,000 combat sorties, RF-4C crews braved unimaginable danger to deliver vital bomb damage assessments and pre-strike intelligence, relying on an advanced combination of forward oblique, vertical, and panoramic cameras. The Phantom could photograph a sweeping 180-degree swath beneath its hull, uncovering hidden enemy movements with crystal clarity. To survive, the RF-4C carried absolutely no weapons, relying entirely on its blistering Mach 2.23 top speed and agile fighter escorts to escape deadly threats. Although 19 aircraft were lost to a lethal mix of anti-aircraft guns and SA-2 surface-to-air missiles, not a single Phantom was ever confirmed destroyed by enemy MiGs in close-range aerial pursuit. The rugged platform even answered the call decades later in the 1991 Gulf War, proving its enduring tactical value. Before its active service ended in 1995, the prolific RF-4C secured its place as America's most trusted battlefield scout. It remains a true icon of military aviation history. High above the modern battlefield, a silent, unyielding electronic net sweeps across the electromagnetic spectrum. This is the realm of the Boeing RC-135 V/W rivet joint, the most sophisticated signals intelligence collection platform in human history. Derived from the classic C-135 airframe and operating continuously since 1964, this flying laboratory carries up to 30 highly trained intelligence specialists. Cruising safely within international airspace, its highly classified sensor systems intercept, analyze, and geolocate electronic emissions from hundreds of miles away. It feeds near real-time data straight to the National Security Agency and theater commanders, providing an invisible shield for Western forces. The rivet joint operates alongside elite sister variants, including the RC-135U Combat Scent, which hunts specific radar signatures, and the RC-135S Cobra Ball, tracking foreign ballistic missile tests. Boasting over 60 years of unbroken operational continuity, the RC-135 program outlives generations of satellites by delivering flexible, responsive communications monitoring that space platforms simply cannot match. From the darkest days of the Cold War to today's modern global conflicts, the 17 active rivet joints remain America's premier electronic eyes, proving that control of the invisible spectrum dictates victory on the ground. Its ongoing service ensures that no adversary electronic signal goes completely unnoticed. Naval reconnaissance is a tense game of cat and mouse, but on April 1st, 2001, it triggered an explosive international crisis. A US Navy Lockheed EP-3E Ares II, packed with 17 electronic intelligence specialists, was flying a routine mission 70 miles off Hainan Island. Suddenly, 2 Chinese J-8 jet fighters intercepted the slow turboprop. One pilot, Wang Wei, conducted a series of terrifyingly aggressive passes. On his third attempt, he miscalculated, slamming his jet directly into the EP-3E before plummeting into the sea. The violent collision destroyed the Ares nose cone, shredded its number 1 propeller, and heavily damaged the stabilizer. Spiraling downward, Commander Shane Osborne miraculously stabilized the crippled aircraft. With no other options, he executed an emergency landing directly on China's Lingshui airbase. The 24 crew members were immediately detained, sparking an intense 11-day diplomatic standoff between Washington and Beijing. While the crew managed to partially sanitize classified data, the intact spy plane was thoroughly dissected by Chinese technical teams before being returned in pieces months later. The Hainan incident exposed the razor-thin line between electronic espionage and open warfare, leaving a scar on modern naval history. The incident reshaped US-China defense relations for the entire modern era. The dawn of the 21st century witnessed a fundamental paradigm shift in espionage, removing human pilots in favor of infinite mechanical endurance. This revolution was spearheaded by the Northrop Grumman RQ-4 Global Hawk. Entering service in 2001, this high-altitude drone bypassed human physiological limitations, flying continuous missions lasting an incredible 32 hours. Cruising at 60,000 feet, its integrated sensor suite combined advanced electro-optical, infrared, and synthetic aperture radar systems to map vast geographic targets. However, this unmatched robotic persistence came with a staggering price tag of over $200 million per aircraft, sparking fierce congressional spending debates. The high stakes of unmanned espionage exploded on June 19, 2019, when an Iranian surface-to-air missile blasted a naval variant, Global Hawk, directly over the vital Strait of Hormuz. The shock loss pushed Washington to the absolute brink of open war, with President Donald Trump calling off a retaliatory missile strike just 10 minutes before execution. Proving that losing a robotic platform carries immense geopolitical consequences, the Global Hawk continues to fly critical missions today, standing as an indispensable asset for persistent intelligence collection across the globe. Its mechanical eyes watch over dangerous geopolitical hotspots with absolute, sleepless vigilance. In 2007, a mysterious radar-evading ghost was spotted over Afghanistan, earning an ominous nickname from aviation observers, the Beast of Kandahar. This phantom was the Lockheed RQ-170 Sentinel, a top-secret stealth drone designed to operate deep within heavily contested airspace. The Sentinel would secure an immortal place in intelligence history during the historic 2011 hunt for Osama bin Laden. Hovering completely undetected directly over the heavily fortified Abbottabad compound for months, its highly advanced sensors gathered invaluable pattern-of-life intelligence, allowing CIA analysts to verify the presence of the world's most wanted terrorist, ultimately green-lighting the legendary SEAL Team 6 raid. But the program suffered a catastrophic security breach just months later. On December 4, 2011, an RQ-170 vanished over eastern Iran, hijacked intact by Iranian forces utilizing sophisticated electronic GPS spoofing techniques. Tehran proudly displayed the captured stealth prize to the world, reverse engineering it to build their own lethal fleet of domestic drones. The Sentinel's dual legacy remains a striking illustration of modern warfare, an unparalleled intelligence triumph that instantly transformed into a severe technological compromise, rewriting the rules of robotic espionage forever. It proved that in the cyber age, data is the ultimate prize. At the absolute frontier of modern military secrecy lies a phantom aircraft designed to conquer the world's most dangerous skies, the Northrop Grumman RQ-180. First reported in 2013 and developed under total institutional wraps, this massive, high-altitude stealth drone represents the highly classified future of American airborne espionage. Engineered explicitly for penetrating intelligence missions, the RQ-180 is built to infiltrate anti-access and area denial environments where standard aircraft would be instantly detected and obliterated by peer adversaries. Boasting an estimated massive 130-foot wingspan, its advanced flying wing design blends extreme high-altitude efficiency with unmatched next-generation radar evasion. The United States Air Force designed this ghost to accomplish what no satellite or conventional drone can: fly deep within heavily defended airspace over major global rivals like China and Russia to gather real-world, highly precise targeting intelligence. Because the entire program remains completely blanketed in strict government secrecy, its exact technical specifications and active deployment logs are fiercely guarded secrets. The RQ-180 remains an invisible phantom, a silent mechanical wraith patrolling the edge of space, securing Western dominance in a dangerous new era of peer-adversary conflict. It is the ultimate ghost in a world of ever-watching digital eyes. The Gloucester Meteor 3947, built across 17 variants, entering operational service with 616 Squadron on July 27, 1944, was the only Allied jet fighter to fly combat operations in World War II, and the aircraft that gave Britain its first operational experience with turbojet-powered interceptors, while the Luftwaffe was simultaneously fielding the Messerschmitt Me-2 6-2. The Meteor F-1 was kept from the continent intentionally. The Air Ministry feared German capture and reverse engineering of the Whittle jet engine, and spent its operational debut intercepting V-1 flying bombs over southern England. 13 V-1s destroyed before the war ended. The F-8 variant, the definitive day fighter, reached 965 kilometers per hour in level flight and equipped the bulk of RAF fighter command through the late 1940s and into the early 1950s. Australia's Royal Australian Air Force deployed F-8 Meteors to Korea in 1951, where they entered combat against MiG-15S, with results that established both the limits of the type and the risks of committing second-generation jets against the swept-wing contemporaries they were never designed to fight. 5 MiG-15S were credited to RAAF pilots. 32 Meteors were lost, primarily to MiG guns. The kill ratio was unfavorable in every analysis. The NF-11 through NF-14 night fighter variants, equipped with AI Mark 10 radar in an extended nose, served RAF night fighter squadrons into the late 1950s alongside the more capable Venom and Javelin. The Meteor's legacy was the foundational knowledge of jet operations that every subsequent British fighter built upon. It was obsolescent before it peaked. It was essential anyway. The de Havilland Vampire 3268, built worldwide, entering RAF service in April 1946, achieved several firsts that shaped global jet aviation. On December 3, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown landed an experimental Vampire on the deck of HMS Ocean, becoming the first pilot to land a jet aircraft on an aircraft carrier. The test demonstrated that carrier jet operations were possible in principle, even if the Vampire's limited engine power and long landing run made it impractical for fleet service without catapult assistance. The FB-5 fighter bomber, the primary production variant, combined 4 20mm cannon with capacity for 908 kilograms of bombs or rockets, establishing the multi-role fighter bomber concept that would define British tactical aircraft through the 1950s and 1960s. The twin-boom pusher configuration, engine buried in the fuselage pod with tail surfaces carried on twin booms, was a radical visual departure from contemporary designs, but provided a short jet pipe that minimized thrust losses in the Goblin's relatively modest power output. The Vampire equipped RAF frontline squadrons in Germany, the Middle East, and the Far East through the late 1940s and early 1950s, seeing combat in Malaya where FB-9 aircraft conducted ground attack operations against communist insurgents. Its export success, 31 nations operated the type, made it Britain's most internationally influential first-generation jet fighter, establishing the commercial relationships in defence exports that Hawker's Hunter would develop into a major industrial programme. The de Havilland Venom, 1,430 built, entering service in August 1952 as a direct development of the Vampire, with a Ghost engine producing 43% more thrust, bridged the gap between Britain's first-generation jets and the swept-wing designs of the mid-1950s. The thinner wing section and increased power pushed maximum speed to Mach 0.85, placing it in the transonic range, where compressibility effects began to affect handling, providing operational experience in a speed regime that the subsequent Hunter and Swift would explore more deeply. In the Suez Crisis of November 1956, Sea Venom FAW-21s from HMS Albion, Bulwark, and Eagle conducted strikes against Egyptian airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground and hitting radar installations. 7 Egyptian aircraft were destroyed. The operation was cut short by American diplomatic pressure that halted the campaign before its objectives were achieved, not through military failure but through political intervention. The Sea Venoms had done their job. The job was then cancelled around them. The NF-2 and NF-3 night fighter variants replaced the Meteor NF series in the all-weather interception role, serving with RAF squadrons until the Javelin's introduction in 1960. The NF-3's AI Mark 21 radar gave it genuine all-weather search and track capability against subsonic targets, the requirement that defined RAF night fighter operations through the early Cold War years when Soviet bombers were the primary threat and weather over the North Sea was a constant adversary. The Hawker Seahawk, 541 built, entering Fleet Air Arm Service in 1953, was the Royal Navy's primary carrier-based jet during the Suez operation and the aircraft that demonstrated Britain's carrier strike capability immediately before that capability was politically curtailed. The Seahawk's bifurcated jet exhaust, the intake split to pass air through the wing route, exhausting through 2 outlets on either side of the tail, was an unusual engineering solution that lowered the center of gravity and improved carrier deck handling, but added manufacturing complexity for marginal aerodynamic benefit. FGA-6 Seahawks from HMS Eagle Albion and Bulwark flew 89 attack sorties in the 8 days of Operation Musketeer's air campaign against Egypt in November 1956, targeting Egyptian Air Force bases at Abu Suwayya, Luxor, and Cairo West. The operation destroyed substantial numbers of Egyptian aircraft on the ground, while Seahawks suffered no losses to Egyptian air defense. The campaign demonstrated that well-executed carrier strikes could achieve air superiority over a defended target area, precisely when American political pressure terminated it. The Seahawk's service with the Royal Navy ended in 1960, replaced by the de Havilland Sea Vixen for the all-weather interception role. Germany and India operated Seahawks into the 1970s and 1983, respectively, the Indian Seahawks from INS Vikrant, conducting attacks on Pakistani targets in the 1971 Bangladesh War, including the mining of Chittagong Harbour. Britain had retired the aircraft that would subsequently fight one of the more consequential naval air campaigns of the Cold War era. The Supermarine Swift, 197 built, entering RAF service in February 1954 as the first swept-wing aircraft to equip a frontline RAF squadron, became one of the most operationally damaging procurement decisions in British aviation history before the TSR-2 cancellation. The F1 and F2 marks suffered from a pitch-up instability at transonic speeds that made them dangerous at the altitudes and speeds they were intended to operate. Above Mach 0.9, the Swift could enter an uncontrollable nose-up pitch that pilots could not correct before the aircraft departed controlled flight. Several pilots died before the problem was fully characterized. The F1 and F2 were grounded in 1955, less than a year after entry to service. The F3 and F4 were cancelled before production. Only the FR5 photo reconnaissance variant, operating at lower altitudes in a different performance envelope that avoided the problematic transonic regime, achieved sustained operational usefulness in Germany through the late 1950s. The F7 ground attack prototype demonstrated that the basic airframe, when not asked to operate as a pure fighter, could perform adequately. Being adequate at lower altitudes in a less demanding role was not what Supermarine had promised the RAF. The Swift's failure handed the Hunter a clear field as Britain's primary swept-wing fighter, and effectively ended Supermarine's independent fighter development. The company merged into BAC in 1960, with the Swift's failure as context. The aircraft that had built the Spitfire produced the Swift. The contrast was not discussable in certain circles. It is relevant in this one. The Hawker Hunter, 1,972 built, entering RAF service in July 1954, was the aircraft that gave Britain's post-war aviation industry its primary commercial success and gave the RAF its first truly effective swept-wing day fighter. On September 7, 1953, squadron leader Neville Duke set an absolute world speed record of 1,171 kilometers per hour in a prototype Hunter, a moment of national aviation pride that the Swift's concurrent failures had made urgently necessary. The record was largely symbolic. What mattered operationally was that the Hunter could sustain combat maneuvering at high subsonic speeds without the pitch-up instability that had grounded the Swift. The FGA-9 fighter ground attack variant, developed for the Near East and Far East Air Forces, carried 4 30mm Arden cannon, plus 3,630 kilograms of rockets, bombs and fuel, giving it genuine versatility in the counterinsurgency and conventional strike roles that the RAF would use throughout the 1960s in Aden, Borneo and Kuwait. The Hunter's contribution to the Aden emergency from 1963 to 1967 included low-level strafing and rocket attacks against dissident tribesmen in conditions that demonstrated the aircraft's robustness in harsh operating environments. 21 nations operated the Hunter, with combat use continuing through the 1991 Lebanese Civil War. Lebanon's Hunters flying combat missions 37 years after the type's RAF introduction. Abu Dhabi's Hunters fired the opening shots of the 1971 India-Pakistan War. Chile's last Hunters were retired in 1995, the aircraft that was supposed to be an interim type until supersonic fighters arrived became the defining British jet fighter of its generation through sheer capability and endurance. The Gloucester Javelin 436, built across 9 marks, entering RAF service in February 1956, was the world's first purpose-designed twin-jet all-weather delta-wing fighter, an aircraft that addressed the specific requirement for an interceptor capable of finding and engaging Soviet bombers in all conditions over the North Sea and northern Europe. Its broad delta wing gave the Javelin a characteristic profile that RAF pilots called the flying flat iron, not affectionately, because the delta planform at subsonic speeds produced handling characteristics that required significantly more pilot adaptation than the Hunter's more conventional wing. The FAW.9, the definitive mark, carried 4 Firestreak infrared-guided missiles as its primary armament alongside 4 30mm cannon, the first RAF interceptor to carry both gun and missile armament in a fully integrated weapons system. The AI Mark 17 fire control radar provided search and track capability against targets at night and in cloud, giving the Javelin genuine all-weather interception capability that the Meteor NF series had only partially achieved. The Javelin's development span of 9 marks over 8 years of production reflected the difficulty of developing all-weather interception technology in parallel with building the aircraft to carry it, a serial iterative improvement process in which each mark addressed deficiencies identified in the previous one. The FAW.9 was substantially more capable than the FAW.1. They shared an airframe and little else. The last Javelins were retired in 1968, replaced by the Lightning and McDonnell Phantom in their respective single-seat and 2-seat roles. The de Havilland Sea Vixen, 145 built, entering Fleet Air Arms service in July 1959, was the last purpose-designed British carrier-based jet fighter, a 2-seat all-weather interceptor that gave the Royal Navy genuine beyond visual range interception capability and infrared-guided missile armament for the first time. The unusual offset cockpit, pilot to port, observer buried in the starboard fuselage without external windows, maximized the radar observer's working environment while making the observer's situation profoundly claustrophobic and operationally isolating. Observers who ejected faced different trajectory and speed conditions than the pilot, an asymmetry that carrier deck accidents made uncomfortably relevant. The FAW-2, introduced in 1963 with red-top missiles replacing Firestreaks, provided a longer-range, more capable seeker that gave the Sea Vixen an effective engagement envelope against contemporary Soviet maritime patrol aircraft. Red Top's first combat use came during operations off Aden in 1964, where Sea Vixens from HMS Centaur provided air defense cover for ground operations against Yemeni dissidents, an operational context that demonstrated that air defense capability could not be separated from strike capability in carrier air-wing planning, as the same aircraft needed to perform both functions when the carrier operated independently. The Sea Vixen was replaced by the McDonnell Phantom FG-1 from 1969, a replacement that reflected the Royal Navy's recognition that it needed an aircraft with supersonic performance, greater payload, and longer range than the Sea Vixen could provide. That the replacement was an American design rather than a British one reflected the cancellation of the P1154 and the TSR-2 that had consumed the indigenous supersonic development funding. The English Electric Lightning, 338 built, entering RAF service with 74 Squadron on June 29, 1960, was the fastest British aircraft ever built, the only entirely British Mark II fighter ever to enter service, and the last purely British fighter designed to fly in RAF frontline service. Its twin Rolls-Royce Avon engines were stacked vertically in the fuselage, a configuration that no other production aircraft in history had used, providing a thrust-to-weight ratio that gave it the ability to climb from brake release to 15,240 meters in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It could sustain Mach 2.27 in level flight. No aircraft that the Soviet Union was likely to send over Britain in 1960 could catch it after it was airborne. The Lightning's limitations were the direct consequence of its extraordinary performance characteristics. The fuel fraction, the proportion of total weight devoted to fuel, was too low for the power the engines demanded, limiting combat radius to approximately 370 kilometers without overload tanks. The weapons load was similarly constrained, 2 red-top missiles and 2 Aden cannon, because the high-performance airframe left no volume for conventional weapon bays. An interceptor of extraordinary capability and minimal persistence, it could sprint to any threat within its radius and destroy it. It could not loiter. The F-6, the definitive mark, addressed endurance with overwing fuel tanks and a ventral pack that extended combat time, but visually transformed the elegant original design into something more purposeful than beautiful. Lightnings served with the RAF until 1988, 28 years from entry to service, and with the Royal Saudi Air Force into the 1980s. Saudi Lightnings flew intercepts against Iranian aircraft during the Iran-Iraq War. The aircraft that was designed to intercept Soviet bombers over Britain spent its twilight years over the Persian Gulf. Geography is irrelevant to performance specifications. The Hawker Siddeley P-1154, cancelled April 6, 1965, £50 million spent, was the aircraft that would have made Britain the only nation capable of deploying a Mach 2 vertical takeoff fighter, a capability that no other country possessed in 1965 and that no country has possessed since. The Bristol Siddeley BS-100 engine's plenum chamber burning system, after burning in the vectored jet streams rather than in a conventional jet pipe, would have given supersonic thrust in the vertical lift regime that the subsonic Pegasus engine in the Harrier could never approach. The P-1154's cancellation was driven by 3 intersecting forces: NATO pressure against a design that was specifically British rather than collaborative, Royal Navy insistence on 2 engines for carrier safety that the single-engine P-1154 could not satisfy, and Dennis Healy's defense review cost calculations that showed an American F-4 Phantom in both RAF and RN service would be cheaper than developing 2 separate variants of the P-1154. All 3 arguments were technically defensible. None addressed the strategic consequence. Cancelling the world's only Mach 2 V/STOL fighter terminated the BS-100 engine program simultaneously, eliminating the propulsion technology that would have made a second-generation supersonic Harrier possible in the 1970s. The F-4 Phantom that replaced it was a better aircraft in most conventional performance measures. It could not operate from unprepared forward strips. It needed a 2,600-meter runway. The P-1154 needed 100 meters. The operational flexibility that the difference represented was the entire point. It was cancelled anyway. The McDonnell Phantom FGR-2, entering RAF service in August 1969, the RN's FG-1 from 1969, was the aircraft that the P-1154's cancellation necessitated, an American design adapted for British use by fitting Rolls-Royce Spey bypass turbofans in place of the original General Electric J-79 turbojets. The modification required widening the fuselage to accommodate the Spey's larger diameter and produced a characteristic bulged appearance that distinguished British Phantoms visually from every other variant. The Spey's higher bypass ratio gave superior fuel economy and thrust at low altitude, specifically the North Sea and Central European environments where RAF Phantoms would spend most of their operational lives. The adaptation also introduced a specific problem. The wider fuselage disturbed airflow to the engines above 40,000 feet, reducing high-altitude performance below the American J-79 powered variant's capability. A Phantom that was better at low altitude and worse at altitude than the aircraft it was adapted from, a consequence of prioritizing British engine content over unmodified performance. The political decision to use British engines rather than American ones produced a different aircraft from either the original design or what the P1154 would have been. FGR-2S flew combat air patrols over the South Atlantic during the Falklands War in 1982, operating from Ascension Island and forward deploying to Stanley after its capture. Their contribution was defensive, providing air cover against potential Argentine long-range strikes rather than offensive. The aircraft that Britain had bought to replace the P1154 defended the islands that the P1154 might have been deployed from. The Hawker Siddeley Harrier 824, built across all variants for all operators, entering RAF service on April 1, 1969, vindicated the vertical takeoff concept that the P1154's cancellation had appeared to terminate, demonstrated in the Falklands War the combat value of genuine V/S TOL capability in an expeditionary context, and exported to the United States Marine Corps, which adopted it as its primary close air support aircraft, because no American design could match its short-field performance. Britain had built the aircraft that America's Marines preferred over American alternatives. The Sea Harrier FRS.1 entered service with the Fleet Air Arm in April 1980, providing carrier-based air defense and strike capability that the Royal Navy had lacked since the withdrawal of the Phantom. In the Falklands War of April to June 1982, Sea Harriers from HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible achieved 20 confirmed kills against Argentine combat aircraft, Mirages, Daggers, Skyhawks, Canberras, and a Learjet, without a single Sea Harrier lost in air-to-air combat. The aircraft that had been described as a subsonic compromise incapable of serious fighter work killed everything it was pointed at. The GR-7 and GR-9 variants, jointly developed with Boeing and incorporating American avionics and weapons, served in Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq before their controversial retirement in 2010 as part of the Strategic Defense Review cuts. The retirement simultaneously eliminated RAF and RN fixed-wing carrier aviation capability, grounding the Ark Royal and Illustrious alongside the aircraft they carried. The aircraft that had won the Falklands was scrapped to fund other priorities. The Falkland Islands still require defense. The Panavia Tornado F3, 165 built, entering RAF service in November 1986 as the air defense variant replacing the Phantom and Lightning, was an interceptor stretched from a strike aircraft airframe, a compromise visible in every operational assessment, and one that the RAF accepted because the Eurofighter Typhoon that would have replaced it was running a decade behind schedule. The swing-wing variable geometry configuration optimized for the Tornado GR1's low-level strike roll gave the F3 acceptable supersonic performance at altitude, but made it heavier, less agile, and less efficient in the pure fighter role than the purpose-designed interceptors it was meant to replace. The GEC Marconi AI-24 Foxhunter radar, designed to give the F-3 a genuine look-down/shoot-down capability against Soviet bombers at long range, entered service in a state so incomplete that the aircraft flew with concrete ballast in place of the radar for the first 4 years of service life, 1986 to 1990, while the radar's development problems were resolved. The Tornado F-2 Mark entered service with non-functioning radar. An air defense interceptor without functional radar is a fast, expensive aircraft that cannot intercept anything beyond visual range. The F-3 performed creditably in Gulf War air defense patrols in 1991, the radar by then functioning, and flew combat air patrols in Kosovo and the Falklands replacement cycle. Saudi Arabia's Tornado ADV, acquired in 1989, flew intercepts against Iranian aircraft during the Gulf War. The last RAFF-3As were retired in 2011, replaced by the Typhoon FGR-4 in the air defense role. The aircraft that was always a compromise ended its service as exactly that. The Eurofighter Typhoon, entering RAF service on June 30, 2003 in the F-2 air defense variant, with 160 aircraft across 3 tranches, at a British programme cost of approximately £37 billion over its life cycle, is the most capable combat aircraft the RAF has ever operated, and one of the most expensive procurement programmes in British defence history. The unstable Delta Canard configuration, controlled by digital fly-by-wire through a flight control system that makes 40 corrections per second to an aerodynamically inherently unstable airframe, produces agility that physically conventional designs cannot match. The Typhoon can sustain 9 G-turns, change direction faster than any contemporary adversary, and accelerate through the transonic regime in conditions that would make earlier swing-wing aircraft uncomfortable. The MBDA Meteor Beyond Visual Range air-to-air missile, carried exclusively on Typhoon among Western fighters currently in service, has a no-escape zone, the distance within which a target cannot outrun the missile regardless of its maneuvering, approximately 3 times larger than the AIM-12 0AMRAAM. The specific capability advantage this provides in beyond visual range combat, where most modern air engagements are decided, makes the Typhoon/Meteor combination the most capable air defense system in any European Air Force. Libya in 2011, Syria from 2014, and Iraq from 2014 through 2019 provided the Typhoon sustained combat record, though in a ground attack and close air support role rather than the pure air defense role it was optimized for. The FGR-4's multi-role capability with Storm Shadow, Paveway 4 and Brimstone missiles transformed an air superiority fighter into a precision strike platform. The EAP demonstrator that led to Typhoon flew in 1986. The aircraft it spawned is scheduled to remain in service until the late 2040s. The BAE Hawk T-1A entering RAF service in 1976 as the T-1 Advanced Trainer with 72 aircraft modified to T-1A standard, carrying 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, occupied the specific and uncomfortable operational category of designated wartime point defense fighter. In the event of a major Warsaw-Pact air offensive against Britain's airfields and air defense radar chain, T-1A Hawks from the RAF's advanced training units at Valley and Chivener would have been committed to combat against Soviet aircraft. The Hawk's subsonic performance, limited endurance, and lack of radar made it a marginal air defense asset. It was the only option available if Tornado F-3S had been exhausted. The Combat Hawk 100 and Hawk 200 variants, developed for export from 1984, addressed the T-1's limitations with HOTAS controls, weapons management systems, and optional radar for the 200. Malaysia, Oman, UAE, and India operated Hawk combat variants as genuine frontline aircraft rather than augmented trainers. The Hawk 200 single-seat variant demonstrated that the basic airframe could support sophisticated avionics and weapons at competitive cost, the value proposition that made it commercially successful in markets where American or European frontline fighters were unaffordable. The T-1A's wartime point defense role was formally withdrawn in 2015 when the Typhoon fleet reached sufficient numbers to provide credible coverage without requiring trainer aircraft in combat roles. The Hawk T-2, replacing the T-1 in lead-in fighter training from 2009, carries modern cockpit systems aligned with Typhoon and F-35B procedures. The aircraft that was designed in 1971 as a trainer is still training the pilots who fly Britain's most advanced combat aircraft in 2024. The Lockheed Martin F-35B, entering operational service with 617 Squadron RAF and 809 Naval Air Squadron RN from 2019, with 138 aircraft planned at a committed cost of £9.1 billion, is the first operational stealth aircraft in British service, the first British carrier-based jet since the Harrier's 2010 retirement, and the aircraft whose procurement definitively answered the question of whether Britain would maintain an indigenous fighter design capability. It would not. The F-35B is American in design, American in software, and American in the maintenance decisions that determine what weapons it can carry and when it can fly. BAE Systems manufactures approximately 15% of every F-35 built globally, the aft fuselage sections, under a work-share agreement that provides industrial employment and revenue while granting no design authority over the aircraft's fundamental parameters. Britain is the largest industrial partner in the F-35 program, with the least sovereign control over the aircraft it produces parts for. The 15% work share generates approximately £1.4 billion annually. The £9.1 billion committed to purchasing the aircraft funds the American program that BAE Systems works on. The F-35B's short takeoff and vertical landing capability, the specific characteristic that required the Royal Navy's Queen Elizabeth carriers to be built with ski jump ramps rather than catapults, means that Britain has permanently committed to a carrier configuration optimized for STOVL operations. The decision made the carriers cheaper to build and more limited in the aircraft types they can operate. If the F-35B program fails, there is no alternative carrier-capable British aircraft. The Harrier's cancellation and the F-35B's adoption are the same strategic decision made twice, 44 years apart. The Global Combat Air Programme, announced by the UK, Japan and Italy in December 2022 as the consolidation of the British Tempest and Japanese FX programmes, with £2 billion committed to development through 2025 and initial operational capability targeted for 2035, is Britain's attempt to remain in the first tier of combat aircraft design after a 60-year period in which the tendency has been consistently toward licensed American designs rather than indigenous development. The GCAP represents a £60 to £100 billion investment commitment across 3 nations over 2 decades, the scale of expenditure that designing a sixth-generation combat aircraft requires. The program's technology ambitions include an adaptive cycle engine that changes its bypass ratio during flight to optimize for subsonic cruise, or supersonic dash, a propulsion concept that Rolls-Royce is developing under the Orpheus program. Alongside embedded sensors distributed across the airframe, AI-assisted pilot decision support, and the ability to direct loyal wingman drone aircraft. Whether these technologies will be operationally mature by 2035 is the question that every major combat aircraft program asks at this stage of development, and that only subsequent years answer. The relevant historical context is that every British ambitious fighter program has either been cancelled, the P-1154, the Anglo-French variable geometry aircraft, or delivered a decade late and over cost. GCAP's three-nation structure provides cost-sharing and political resilience against unilateral cancellation, at the cost of design compromises and the industrial politics that collaborative programs inevitably generate. Whether this is the program that reverses the long decline in British fighter design independence or the next program to demonstrate its limits is a question that 2035 will begin to answer. The Martin MB-2 established the foundational template for American strategic bombing at a moment when the doctrine was entirely theoretical. Designed by Glenn L. Martin Company and entering service with the Army Air Service in 1921, the MB-2 was a biplane bomber that carried no combat record from World War I, but immediately acquired one through Billy Mitchell's controversial demonstration. On July 21, 1921, MB-2s and other Army aircraft sank the captured German battleship Ostfriesland off the Virginia Capes, dropping 2,000-pound bombs that tore open the ship's hull and sent her to the bottom in 21 minutes. The sinking proved Mitchell's argument that aircraft could sink battleships, a finding the Navy disputed on procedural grounds, noting the ship was stationary and undefended. The dispute shaped American military aviation politics for 2 decades and contributed directly to Mitchell's court-martial in 1925. The MB-2 itself was a limited instrument, 99 miles per hour maximum speed, 558-mile range, and a payload of 2,000 pounds were barely adequate for the demonstration mission and militarily marginal for any sustained campaign against defended targets. Manufactured by Curtiss under license as the NBS-1 designation, 130 were built. The MB-2 remained the primary USAAC heavy bomber through 1928. Establishing crew procedures, maintenance protocols, and bombing techniques that carried forward to every subsequent generation. Its importance was institutional. The aircraft itself was obsolete the day it entered service. The Keystone Aircraft Corporation's bomber series represented a decade of incremental biplane development without a fundamental technological advance. The LB-5, LB-7, B-3A, B-4A, B-5A, and B-6A variants spanned production from 1927 through 1932, with each successive version offering modest improvements in speed and payload within the same basic biplane configuration. The B-6A, the definitive variant, achieved 121 miles per hour and could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs, marginal numbers for an aircraft intended to destroy strategic infrastructure. Keystone bombers constituted the majority of USAAC bombing strength through the early 1930s, equipping the 2nd Bombardment Group at Langley Field and the 11th Bombardment Squadron at March Field. Their crews developed the fundamental techniques of formation bombing, navigation, and crew coordination that would be applied to far more capable aircraft a decade later. The Keystone series is significant less for what it accomplished than for what it defined as inadequate. Air Corps tactical school instructors at Maxwell Field, Alabama, including Major Harold George and Captain Donald Wilson, developed precision bombing doctrine against the Keystone's visible limitations. The doctrine outpaced the aircraft by years. When the B-17 arrived, the doctrine was ready. The Keystones had been the equipment the doctrine was waiting to replace. The Boeing Y-1B9 was the first all-metal, low-wing monoplane bomber in American service, a machine that made every biplane bomber in the world obsolete overnight and set the design lineage that led directly to the B-17. When the prototype flew in April 1931, its 186 miles per hour maximum speed exceeded the top speed of the Army Air Corps' frontline pursuit fighters. A bomber faster than fighters was not a theoretical advantage, it was a doctrinal event. Bomber advocates used the Y-1B9's performance data to argue that high-speed, high-altitude bombing made fighter interception impractical. The argument was premature, but not dishonest. At the speeds and altitudes the Y-1B9 could achieve in 1931, contemporary fighters struggled to intercept it. The logic held for approximately 5 years before fighter development, supercharger technology, and radar-directed interception made speed alone an insufficient defense. The Y-1B9 institutionalized an assumption that the B-17 inherited, and the Schweinfurt raids ultimately disproved. Only 7 aircraft were built, 5 service test Y-1B9As and 2 B-9s for the second bombardment group. The Martin B-10 proved faster and cheaper and won the production contract. Boeing applied the Y-1B9's structural lessons to the Model 299, which became the XB-17. 7 aircraft changed American bomber design forever. Not one saw combat. The Martin B-10 won the 1932 Army bomber competition against Boeing's Y-1B9 by posting 213 miles per hour, faster than any pursuit aircraft in the Air Corps inventory at the time, in a design that incorporated an enclosed cockpit, retractable undercarriage internal bomb bay, and rotating nose turret in a single integrated package that no contemporary bomber matched. The Collier Trophy Committee awarded Glenn Martin the 1932 prize specifically for the B-10, recognizing its comprehensive advance over all existing designs. The Air Corps ordered 151 aircraft, equipping the 2nd, 9th, and 28th bombardment groups. B-10s flew a celebrated goodwill flight from Washington, D.C. to Alaska and back in July 1934. Under Lieutenant Colonel Henry Hap Arnold, 7,360 miles completed without major incident, demonstrating operational range that no prior bomber had achieved in peacetime service. The B-10 was rendered obsolete by its own success. It proved that fast, all-metal monoplanes were the future of bombing, which accelerated development of the B-17 that superseded it. Export versions served with the Netherlands East Indies Air Force in 1942, flying combat sorties against Japanese forces, the only B-10 combat record. All were lost within weeks. The aircraft that transformed bomber design had its one combat experience fighting a war it couldn't survive. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress entered combat doctrine before it entered combat. When the prototype XB-299 crashed on takeoff at Wright Field on October 30th, 1935, traced to control locks left engaged, Boeing lost the initial production contract. The Air Corps ordered the Douglas B-18 Bolo instead. The B-17 survived only through a supplemental order for 13 service test aircraft and the advocacy of Air Corps General Frank Andrews, who understood that the B-18 was inadequate for strategic missions before the B-17's first combat sortie. The definitive B-17G carried 13.50 caliber machine guns. A chin turret added after early missions proved the nose was the most lethal German attack axis, and a bomb load up to 17,600 pounds over short ranges. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid on August 17, 1943 dispatched 376 B-17S-60 were shot down. The second Schweinfurt mission on October 14, 1943 lost 77 of 291. Unescorted daylight precision bombing was not viable. The P-51 Mustang provided the solution in early 1944. 12,731 B-17S were built across 8 major variants. They dropped 640,036 tons of bombs on European targets, 46% of the 8th Air Force's total bomb tonnage. The aircraft that defined American strategic bombing theory absorbed losses that no doctrine had projected and delivered results that no analysis had promised. It was simultaneously the validation and the refutation of precision bombing. The consolidated B-24 Liberator was produced in larger numbers than any American combat aircraft in history. 18,482 hulls, built across 13 major variants by 5 manufacturing plants between 1940 and 1945. Ford's Willow Run plant alone was delivering 1 B-24 per hour at peak production in 1944. The numbers obscured a fundamental operational tension. The B-24 was longer ranged than the B-17 but structurally less robust, flew at lower operational altitudes, and was more vulnerable to battle damage through its Davis wing fuel tanks. B-24s equipped the 8th, 9th, 12th, 15th, and 20th Air Forces, operating in every theatre from the Aleutians to North Africa to the South Pacific. The Ploiești mission of August 1st, 1943, Operation Tidal Wave, dispatched 177 B-24s at low altitude against Romanian refineries. 53 aircraft were lost. 5 crew members received the Medal of Honor, the most for any single operation in U.S. military history. Pacific B-24s flew missions from bases in India, China, and later the Marianas, conducting strategic bombing of Japanese oil infrastructure. The B-24's superior range over the B-17 made it the primary Pacific strategic bomber until the B-29 arrived. It was better suited to its theatre than its European counterpart. The numbers built ensured it would serve everywhere, regardless of suitability. The North American B-25. Mitchell acquired its defining moment on April 18, 1942, when 16 aircraft launched from USS Hornet under Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle and struck Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe, the first air attack on the Japanese home islands. The Doolittle raid killed approximately 50 civilians, damaged minimal strategic infrastructure, and accomplished nothing measurable in industrial terms. Its psychological and political consequences were immense. The B-25G and H models replaced the glazed nose with a 75mm M4 cannon, the heaviest gun ever mounted in a US production aircraft for anti-shipping and ground attack missions in the Pacific. A single 75mm hit could sink a destroyer escort. B-25Gs and Hs flew anti-shipping sweeps throughout the Southwest Pacific, attacking Japanese coastal vessels and supply convoys. 9,816 B-25s were built across 12 variants, serving with 40 Allied nations under Lend-Lease. The aircraft that bombed Tokyo in a carrier-launched mission no engineer had previously validated, that mounted an artillery cannon for naval surface warfare, that flew tactical close support missions the same week it flew medium-level precision bombing. The B-25 was the most operationally versatile American aircraft of the war. The Martin B-26 Marauder killed its crews in training before it killed the enemy in combat, accumulating a reputation so lethal during the 1942 training period at MacDill Field, Tampa, that aircrew nicknamed it the Widowmaker and the Flying Prostitute. The high wing loading that produced speed also produced landing speeds of 137 miles per hour at normal loaded weight. Between February and June 1942, the accident rate at MacDill reached 1 crash per week. A congressional investigation in 1942 considered cancelling the B-26 program entirely. General James Doolittle flew it personally and publicly declared it safe, if flown by properly trained pilots following the correct procedures. Wingspan was increased by 6 feet on the B-26B, reducing landing speed by 6 miles per hour. The accident rate fell. The combat record that followed was exceptional. In the European theatre, the B-26 finished the war with the lowest loss rate of any USAA sea bomber, 0.5% per mission. 5,288 B-26 flew 129,943 combat sorties in the European theatre, dropping 169,382 tons of bombs, with operational accuracy superior to any other medium bomber. The aircraft that nearly died in congressional review ended the war as the most precisely effective medium bomber in the inventory. Its reputation was a training problem. Its performance was not. The Douglas A-20 Havoc entered combat with the Royal Air Force before the United States entered the war, a timing that reflected the aircraft's primary role as a low-altitude tactical bomber designed for the French and British Army requirements of 1939 rather than American strategic bombing doctrine. When France fell in June 1940, DB-7 contracts were redirected to Britain, where RAF crews flew them in the intruder and light bomber role. The A-20G, the most produced variant at 2,850 aircraft, replaced the glazed nose with a solid nose mounting 6 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. V-Corps 9th Air Force A-20Gs supported the Normandy breakout in July 1944, flying 3,500-foot altitude attack missions against German troop concentrations ahead of General George Patton's advancing columns. 7,478 A-20s were built across 14 variants, with 3,125 transferred to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where they constituted approximately 1/3 of Soviet light bomber strength throughout 1943 and 1944. The Soviet Air Forces flew more at 20 sorties than the USAAF. An aircraft designed to French specifications became essential to Soviet tactical aviation. The war consumed everything and deployed it everywhere. The Boeing B-29. Superfortress was the most complex and expensive weapon system in American history at the time of its development, a $3 billion program that produced an aircraft operating at the absolute frontier of 1940s technology. The R-335 Zero Right Cyclone engines ran so hot that engine fires were a persistent hazard. The B-29 killed more American airmen in training accidents and mechanical failures during 1943 and 1944 than the Japanese did in combat during the same period. General Curtis LeMay's decision on March 9th and 10th, 1945, to strip the B-29s of defensive guns, load them with incendiaries, and attack Tokyo at low altitude at night changed the character of the strategic bombing campaign. 279 B-29s burned 15.8 square miles of Tokyo in one night, killing an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 civilians, more than either atomic bomb in a single mission. The Mission 40 firebombing campaign that followed destroyed 67 Japanese cities. On August 6, 1945, B-29 Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. On August 9th, Boxcar dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. 3,970 B-29s were built. 2 of them ended a world war. The rest burned cities with a thoroughness that made the atomic bomb's strategic effect arguable. The firebombing had already destroyed the industrial capacity the atomic bombs were credited with targeting. The Douglas A-26 Invader served in 3 separate wars across 28 years, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and was redesignated the B-26 in 1948, when the Air Force eliminated the attack designation, creating the confusing situation of 2 unrelated aircraft simultaneously carrying the B-26 designation in active inventories. It was the fastest light bomber in American service when it entered combat in Europe in September 1944, capable of 355 miles per hour with a full load, faster than many contemporary fighters at low altitude. The A-26B attack variant mounted 8.50 caliber machine guns in the nose plus 8 more in 4 underwing packages, giving it a strafing capability that no other light bomber matched. Korea extended the Invader's operational life through a sustained night interdiction campaign against North Korean supply lines from 1950 to 1953. Vietnam required the aircraft again. Air Force B-26Ks flew combat sorties from Thailand and Vietnam through 1969. A wing failure in 1964 that downed 2 aircraft grounded the fleet temporarily. Rebuilt aircraft flew until the airframe finally ran out of the structural margin that combat had been consuming for 25 years. The Convair B-36 Peacemaker embodied a strategic requirement so extreme that no existing technology could fully satisfy it. An intercontinental bomber capable of reaching the Soviet Union from bases in the continental United States without aerial refueling. The B-36's 10,000-mile unrefueled range achieved through 6 reciprocating engines supplemented by 4 jet pods added to the B-36D variant in 1951 made it the only aircraft that could threaten every industrial target in the USSR from Carswell AFB in Texas. The 10-engine configuration produced chronic engine reliability problems throughout the B-36's service life. A 30-hour mission to a Soviet target and back was not a failure scenario. It was the expected profile. Crews flew in pressurized crew compartments, fore and aft, connected by a pressurized tunnel through the unpressurized bomb bays. Operational missions regularly exceeded 35 hours. The B-36 never dropped a weapon in combat. Its deterrent value was its operational record. SAC kept aircraft on 24-hour alert, maintaining the credible threat that made Soviet first strike calculations uncertain. 384 were built across 10 variants. The aircraft that defined intercontinental deterrence was replaced by the B-52 before it ever needed to do more than exist. Existence was sufficient. It had been designed for exactly that. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet was the aircraft that taught American aeronautics how to build swept-wing jets at strategic scale, a technological breakthrough derived directly from captured German aerodynamic research that Boeing engineers George Scherer and Ben Cohn reviewed at the Falcon research facility in May 1945, 3 weeks after Germany's surrender. The 35-degree wing sweep data that Scherer mailed home from Germany was incorporated into the B-47 design before the engineering team returned to Seattle. 2,042 B-47s equipped SAC from 1951 through 1965. At Mach 0.8, 7 and 40,000 feet, the early Soviet MiG-15 and MiG-17 could barely intercept it. When the Soviet MiG-19 and the SA-2 surface-to-air missile entered service, the B-47's altitude and speed margin eroded. The B-47's safety record was troubling. Between 1951 and 1957, 203 major accidents killed 362 aircrewmen. Nuclear weapon accidents involving B-47s during this period included the 1958 Tybee Island incident, in which a Mark 15 hydrogen bomb, jettisoned into the Atlantic Ocean near Savannah, Georgia, was never recovered. It remains on the seafloor. The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress entered service in 1955, with an expected operational life of 25 years. It is still flying. The 76 B-52H aircraft, currently in USAF service, were built between 1961 and 1962. Every aircraft in the active fleet is older than every pilot who flies it. No weapon system in American history has remained in frontline service as long through as many wars, doctrine shifts, and technological revolutions. The B-52 has outlasted every aircraft designed to replace it. 744 B-52s were built across 8 variants from 1952 to 1962. The aircraft that was designed to deliver hydrogen bombs at high altitude in nuclear war has spent most of its operational life dropping conventional bombs at low altitude in conventional conflicts: Vietnam, Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Arc Light missions in Vietnam beginning in 1965 dispatched B-52s from Guam to strike targets in South Vietnam with 108 750-pound bombs per aircraft, the first conventional combat use of an aircraft designed exclusively for nuclear war. Operation Linebacker, 2 in December 1972, sent 197 B-52s against Hanoi over 11 nights. 15 were shot down by SA-2 missiles. In the Gulf War, B-52s flew 1,624 sorties, dropping 40% of all US bombs. The aircraft designed to end civilization has spent 70 years preventing the wars it was built to fight. The Martin B-57, Canberra was the only foreign-designed aircraft adopted for production by the US Air Force in the jet age, an acknowledgement that the English electric Canberra exceeded every American tactical jet bomber design, submitted in competition in 1950. The Air Force's own B-57A evaluation concluded that the Canberra was superior in speed, ceiling, and handling. B-57Bs equipped the 3rd Bombardment Wing at Johnson Air Base, Japan, and deployed to Vietnam in 1964, the first USAF jet bombers employed in Southeast Asia. On November 1st, 1964, Viet Cong sappers attacked Bien Hoa Air Base, destroying 5 B-57s and damaging 8 more on the ground. The attack killed 4 Americans. President Johnson declined to retaliate. The RB-57F variant, rebuilt by General Dynamics with dramatically extended wings, flew reconnaissance missions at altitudes up to 82,000 feet, higher than the U-2. 2 RB-57Fs were transferred to the Pakistani Air Force, which flew them over China for intelligence collection in the late 1960s. The aircraft that was procured as tactical bomber was eventually flying higher than any other operational aircraft in the world. The Convair B-58 Hustler was the first operational supersonic bomber in any air force, an aircraft that could sustain Mach 2.0 at altitude, making it unreachable by any Soviet interceptor available when it entered service in 1960. It also killed 26 of its own crew members in 26 accidents during its 10-year operational life and was retired at age 10, the youngest major USAF bomber type to be withdrawn from service. The B-58's approach speed of 195 miles per hour was among the highest of any contemporary aircraft. A missed approach left very little margin for recovery. The SAC accident rate for B-58s was 4 times the rate for B-52s. The SA-2 missile made the B-58's Mach 2.0 63,400-foot altitude mission profile questionable by the mid-1960s. Low-altitude penetration profiles that countered radar-guided SAMs reduced the B-58 to subsonic speed, and its structural fatigue, life at low altitude, was inadequate for sustained operations. 116 were built. None fired a weapon in anger. The fastest American bomber ever built was too fast to last. The Douglas B-66 destroyer began as a carrier-based Navy aircraft, the A-3D Sky Warrior, adapted for land operation under an Air Force requirement that specified a tactical nuclear delivery aircraft to replace the B-26 Invader in Tactical Air Command. The B-66 B-bombing variant was deployed to Tactical Air Command units in Europe and the Pacific, equipping the 47th Bombardment Wing at Sculthorpe, England. When the nuclear role transitioned to missiles and the F-105, Thunder Chief assumed the tactical nuclear mission. The B-66's bombing role became redundant. The aircraft found its lasting role as an electronic warfare platform. EB-66C and EB-66E variants flew extensive electronic countermeasures missions in Vietnam from 1965 through 1974, jamming North Vietnamese radar networks ahead of F-105 strike packages. The EB-66 suppressed the radar-guided SA-2 acquisition systems that were destroying American aircraft over North Vietnam. The tactical bomber became the electronic warfare aircraft that kept other aircraft alive. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie was designed to be unreachable, a Mach 3.1 77,000-foot strategic bomber that no Soviet interceptor or surface-to-air missile of the late 1950s could touch. The compressive lift phenomenon discovered during design, in which the shock wave generated at Mach 3 beneath the delta wing created additional lift, was a genuine aerodynamic breakthrough exploited by no other aircraft at that scale. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara cancelled the B-70 production program in 1961, citing 3 arguments. ICBMs were cheaper, more reliable, and harder to intercept than any manned bomber. The SA-2 missile would eventually evolve to intercept Mach 3 aircraft, and the program's $10 billion estimated cost was unacceptable. All three arguments were contestable. McNamara cancelled the program regardless. 2 prototype XB-70As were built for research. The second was destroyed on June 8, 1966, when an F-104 chase plane flew into its wingtip in a mid-air collision during a photo formation flight for General Electric's publicity department, killing 2 pilots. The most advanced American bomber ever designed died in a promotional photograph. The one surviving aircraft is at the National Museum of the USAF at Dayton. The general dynamics. FB-111A entered SAC service as a compromise. The strategic variant of the F-111 variable sweep tactical fighter that McNamara had mandated as a common airframe for both the Air Force and Navy. A multi-role philosophy that produced an aircraft too heavy for carrier operations and too short-ranged for intercontinental strategic bombing. The FB-111A addressed the range deficiency with a longer span version of the variable sweep wing, additional fuel capacity, and the ability to carry the SRAM for standoff nuclear delivery. 76 FB-111. Ours equipped the 381st Strategic Aerospace Wing at Plattsburgh, AFB, New York, and the 509th Bomb Wing at Pease, AFB, New Hampshire, targeting Soviet objectives in western Russia and the Kola Peninsula. 18 FB-111. As participated in Operation El Dorado Canyon, the April 14th and 15th, 1986 strike on Libya, flying from RAF Lakenheath and RAF Upper Hayford, making 6,000-mile round trips with 4 aerial refuelings. The mission struck 5 targets in Tripoli and Benghazi. 1 F-111F was lost. The longest-range bombing raid in history to that point used tactical aircraft on a strategic mission because the B-52 was considered too politically provocative for European hosts. The Rockwell B-1B Lancer arrived in USAF service in 1986 as the survivor of a 2 cancellation program. President Nixon cancelled the original B-1A in 1977 after 4 prototypes, citing cost and the cruise missile's emerging capability as a strategic alternative. President Reagan restarted the program as the B-1B in 1981, accepting reduced top speed Mach 1.25 rather than the B-1A's Mach 2.0 in exchange for a dramatically reduced radar cross-section. The B-1B was not a stealth aircraft, but its radar return was approximately 1% of the B-52's at comparable approach angles. The B-1B's nuclear mission was transferred to the B-2 and B-52 under the START treaties, converting the entire fleet to conventional-only operations. The B-1B carries JDAM, JASSM, and JSOW in quantities that no other aircraft matches, 75,000 pounds of mixed weapons, the largest capacity of any current US aircraft. The B-1B entered conventional combat during Operation Desert Fox in December 1998 and flew extensively in Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. Structural fatigue issues from the high-cycle, low-altitude missions flown in Afghanistan and Iraq have accumulated faster than predicted. The fleet has contracted from 100 to approximately 45 mission-capable aircraft. The USAF is actively drawing down the B-1B fleet as B-21s enter service. The Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit was designed during the Carter administration under the Advanced Technology Bomber program as the aircraft that would survive the Soviet integrated air defense network that had made the B-52's high-altitude mission profile untenable. At $2.1 billion per aircraft in 1998 dollars, the most expensive aircraft ever procured by any nation, the B-2 represents a calculation that 21 aircraft capable of penetrating any existing air defense system were more strategically valuable than several hundred aircraft that could not. The B-2's flying wing configuration achieves its radar cross-section of approximately 0.1 square meters through the combination of shape and radar-absorbent materials. The surface requires controlled humidity hangars at Whiteman AFB, Missouri. The coating degrades in rain and humidity. B-2S flew the opening strikes of Operation Allied Force against Yugoslavia in March 1999, the first combat use of the aircraft, flying 30-hour round trips from Whiteman AFB directly to Serbian targets and back without crew change. 21 targets were destroyed in the first mission. In 2008, Spirit of Kansas crashed on takeoff from Anderson AFB, Guam, the only B-2 loss, attributed to moisture in 3 flush air data sensors, causing incorrect takeoff rotation data. The Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider flew for the first time on November 10, 2022, from Palmdale, California, the first new American bomber designed to fly since the B-2's maiden flight in 1989. Its existence was confirmed publicly in 2015 when the Air Force awarded Northrop Grumman the Long-Range Strike Bomber contract at an undisclosed unit cost, estimated at $550 million in 2010 dollars. The cost reduction, if validated in production, represents either a genuine reduction in technical complexity through mature stealth technology, a reduction in capability, or procurement optimism that production experience will eventually quantify. The B-21 is designed from the outset for the optionally unmanned role. Its flight control architecture accommodates operations without a crew aboard, unlike the B-2, which requires 2 pilots. An unmanned B-21 in a contested airspace over China or a nuclear-armed regional power removes the crew risk calculation. Whether the Air Force will routinely fly it without crew depends on doctrinal decisions not yet made. The USAF plans to procure at least 100 B-21s, replacing both the B-1B and B-2 fleets. The program cost estimate of $203 billion for 100 aircraft has already drawn scrutiny. If the B-21 follows the trajectory of every preceding US bomber program, the number procured will decrease as unit costs increase. The aircraft that is supposed to be more affordable than the B-2 is currently projected to cost roughly the same. The North American B-45 Tornado was the first jet bomber to enter service with the United States Air Force, commissioned in April 1948. The B-45 was a straight-wing design with 4 J-47 turbojets, producing modest performance by later jet standards. Its significance was transitional. It gave the Air Force jet bomber operational experience before the B-47 arrived. The RB-45C reconnaissance variant made the aircraft's most significant operational contributions, flying clandestine reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union, beginning in 1952 under USAF and RAF crews, 3 years before the U-2 program. These missions, conducted under Operation Jiu-Jitsu and kept classified for decades, penetrated Soviet airspace at night to map strategic targets. B-45. As flew combat missions in Korea from 1950, conducting night intruder operations against North Korean supply lines and becoming the first American jet aircraft to fly combat. The aircraft they replaced, the B-26 Invader, proved more effective in the night intruder role, and the B-45A was largely withdrawn from strike operations. The first jet bomber in U.S. service was less capable than the piston aircraft it was supposed to replace. The reconnaissance RB-45Cs outlasted the bombers by 10 years. The McDonnell Douglas, a 12 Avenger II, was cancelled by Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney on January 7, 1991, making it the largest defense program default in Department of Defense history to that date. The A-12 was designed as a carrier-based stealth attack aircraft to replace the A-6 Intruder, a flying wing configuration somewhat analogous to the B-2 scaled for carrier operations. The program had consumed $5 billion in development funding before cancellation. Not one airframe had been completed. No aircraft flew. The contractors, McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics in a teaming arrangement, acknowledged that they could not complete the aircraft on schedule or budget. The composite construction of the flying wing structure had proven more difficult than estimated. The aircraft's weight had grown 30% beyond specification, compromising carrier compatibility. The government sued for $1.35 billion in excess payments. Litigation continued for 23 years before a 2014 settlement that recovered approximately $400 million. The A-12's cancellation left the Navy without a stealth carrier strike aircraft for the following 15 years, a gap filled by the non-stealthy F/A, 18E/F Super Hornet, and eventually addressed by the F-35C. The program demonstrated that stealth technology and flying wing aerodynamics could not necessarily be transferred to the carrier environment within a given program's budget or schedule assumptions. $5 billion. 0 aircraft. 23 years of litigation. The Sikorsky R-4. Hoverfly performed the first combat rescue by helicopter in history on April the 25th and 26th, 1944, when Lieutenant Carter Harmon flew a modified R-4B into the Burmese jungle near Taro to extract 4 survivors, 1 pilot, and 3 wounded soldiers from a crash site unreachable by conventional aircraft or ground forces, 4 separate one-man trips over 2 days. The aircraft could not carry more than pilot and 1 passenger at 800-foot density altitude in the Burmese heat. Harmon flew each trip twice to confirm the jungle was clear, then extracted each man. The total time on station exceeded 6 hours. The R-4 was the first helicopter produced in quantity for any military in the world, 131 built, delivered to the U.S. Army Air Forces, U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, and the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy. Igor Sikorsky's VS-300 experimental design, first flown in September 1939, became the R-4 through progressive refinement that retained the single main rotor and tail rotor configuration Sikorsky had proven. All subsequent American helicopters maintained this configuration as the baseline from which alternatives diverged. The R-4's 75 miles per hour top speed and 220-mile range were militarily marginal, and its 180 horsepower engine provided no payload margin for weapons or meaningful cargo. Its contribution was entirely doctrinal. It demonstrated that a helicopter could operate in forward combat areas, extract casualties from positions inaccessible to fixed-wing aircraft, and survive the conditions that had made such rescues previously impossible. 1 aircraft, 131 copies, established the template that 70 subsequent years of development would refine. The Sikorsky R-5 doubled the R-4's capability in every measurable parameter and transformed helicopter casualty evacuation from an experimental curiosity into a recognized military mission. The 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R985 engine gave the H-5 sufficient power to carry 2 litter patients in external pods while maintaining meaningful performance at altitude, a configuration that permitted forward surgical hospitals to receive battlefield casualties within 30 minutes of wounding rather than the 4 to 12 hours that surface transport required. The Korean War, beginning June 25, 1950, validated the H-5's medevac role with statistical precision. Mobile Army surgical hospital units attached to each corps received H-5s in October 1950. The 2nd Infantry Division's helicopter detachment flew 422 casualties in the first 6 weeks of operation. Mortality rates for soldiers who reached a MASH within the golden hour dropped from 4.5% in World War II to 2.5% in Korea, a 44% reduction attributed directly to helicopter evacuation speed. The Navy's U-2 variant served aboard ship as an anti-submarine search platform and plane guard helicopter, establishing the carrier-based helicopter role that every subsequent naval rotorcraft inherited. 379 H-5s were built across 6 variants. The aircraft that proved medevac worked in Korea flew alongside the H-13 Sioux, a more numerous but less capable design that gained greater popular recognition through television. The H-5's performance data, not its cultural footprint, is what mattered. The Bell H-13 Sioux became the defining image of Korean War helicopter medicine. Its bubble canopy, skid landing gear, and distinctive external litter pods recognizable to anyone who watched the MASH television series. What the television depiction omitted was the aircraft's operational envelope. The 200 horsepower Franklin engine provided barely adequate power for the Korean mountains. The open cockpit was brutally cold at altitude, and the 2 external litters exposed patients to windblast and rotor downwash that no clinical protocol had anticipated. 2,800 H-13S were built across 14 variants from 1947 through 1967, serving with the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, and 35 foreign militaries. Bell's teetering rotor system, in which a 2-blade rotor teeters on a central trunnion, was simpler, lighter, and cheaper to manufacture than fully articulated systems and transmitted less vibration to the airframe. The teetering rotor became the Bell trademark applied to every subsequent Bell helicopter through the UH-1 and AH-1 families. H-13S evacuated approximately 18,000 casualties in Korea. The aircraft that made medevac operationally routine was underpowered, under-equipped, and operated by pilots who improvised procedures faster than doctrine could codify them. The procedures they improvised became doctrine. 70 years later, the helicopter casualty evacuation chain that those pilots built in Korean mountain valleys is still the model that combat medicine uses worldwide. The Piasecki H-21, workhorse nicknamed the Flying Banana for its curved tandem rotor fuselage, was the first helicopter to demonstrate that rotary wing aircraft could conduct tactical troop assault operations, not merely rescue or observation missions. Frank Piasecki's tandem rotor configuration produced a helicopter with genuinely useful load capacity. 20 troops, or 4,000 pounds of cargo, transported at 131 miles per hour to ranges of 265 miles. H-21s were deployed to Vietnam beginning in December 1961, where they flew the first US-supported helicopter assault operations against Viet Cong positions under Operation Chopper on January 12, 1962, inserting 1,000 South Vietnamese Army troops into Cao Mau province by helicopter, the largest helicopter assault in history to that point. The aircraft conducting it was already becoming obsolete. The H-21's single-piston engine was its fundamental limitation in the tropical heat of Vietnam. Density altitude reduced payload significantly. At 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures and 3,000-foot operational elevations, the H-21 struggled to carry half its rated load. It was replaced by the turbine-powered UH-1 Iroquois as rapidly as deliveries permitted. 334 were built. The last were retired in 1967. The aircraft that introduced airmobile assault doctrine was too underpowered to survive the doctrine it created. The Sikorsky H-19. Chickasaw introduced the nose-mounted engine configuration that placed the power plant in the nose with the rotor mast behind it, a layout that cleared the cabin for passengers or cargo and became standard for subsequent utility helicopters. The resulting cabin could accommodate 8 troops or 6 litters, giving the H-19 genuine tactical transport capability within a single-engine airframe. The Marine Corps' HRS-1 variant conducted the first helicopter supply missions of the Korean War, supporting forward units in the Eastern Mountains during 1951 and 1952. In July 1951, Marine HRS-1s airlifted an entire artillery battery, spotter aircraft, field pieces and ammunition to a mountain position in 28 hours that would have required 3 days of road construction and vehicle movement. 1,281 H-19S were built in Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, and Coast Guard variants. The aircraft served in Vietnam in the early advisory period before turbine helicopters arrived. The H-19's piston engine limited high-altitude, hot weather performance in exactly the conditions Southeast Asia presented. Its significance was establishing utility helicopter doctrine during the Korean War, while the turbine-powered successors were being designed to execute that doctrine properly. The Sikorsky H-34. Choctaw was the most capable piston-powered military helicopter ever built by an American manufacturer, the peak of the design lineage that began with the R-4, and it arrived in service just as turbine engines were rendering the piston rotorcraft lineage obsolete. The 1,525 horsepower Wright R-1820 produced 2.5 times the power of the H-19's engine in a helicopter that weighed only 60% more. Marine HUS-1 Seahorses conducted the US military's first helicopter combat assault in Vietnam on April 15, 1962, lifting South Vietnamese troops into battle under Marine advisors. This operation preceded the Army's H-21 assault by 9 months and established a Marine precedent for helicopter assault doctrine. The Navy's HSS-1 Seabat variant served as the primary carrier-based ASW helicopter from 1955 through the mid-1960s. 2,366 H-34s were built in 14 variants across all 4 US services, plus France, Germany, and 20 other nations. The French Armée de l'Air flew H-34s in Algeria from 1956 to 1962, developing helicopter counterinsurgency tactics that US forces later studied. The aircraft that was the last great piston helicopter was simultaneously teaching techniques for the turbine helicopter war that followed it. The Bell UH-1 Iroquois universally called the Huey from its original HU-1 designation, is the most produced military helicopter in American history and the aircraft that defined the Vietnam War more completely than any other single piece of equipment. 16,000 were built across variants spanning from 1959 to the present. The final production model, the UH-1Y Venom, was delivered to the Marine Corps in 2019. The UH-1's slap-slap rotor sound became the sonic signature of the Vietnam War, identifiable from 3 miles in conditions that allowed no other warning. At peak Vietnam operations in 1969, the Army operated 4,000 Hueys simultaneously in-country, executing 2,300 missions per day. They inserted troops, extracted casualties, resupplied fire bases, evacuated civilians, and died by the dozens. 3,305 were lost in Vietnam to all causes, 1,074 to hostile fire, 2,231 to accidents. No aircraft in American history has experienced a loss rate of comparable scale in a single conflict. The armed UH-1B gunship variant, mounting M60 machine guns and 2.75-inch rocket pods, was improvised in Vietnam before the AH-1 Cobra was developed. It proved that escort helicopters could suppress landing zone defenses, but its passenger capacity was consumed by weapon systems, creating the doctrinal demand for a purpose-designed attack helicopter that the Cobra filled. The Huey defined what helicopters could do. The aircraft that replaced it defined what attack helicopters should be. The Bell AH-1 Cobra was designed in 6 months and rushed into production under Vietnam combat pressure, an extraordinary development timeline that would produce a platform still in service 57 years later. Bell's proposal to the Army in 1965 used the UH-1's rotor system, transmission, and engine in a purpose-designed narrow-body fuselage that presented a 36-inch frontal profile against enemy fire, mounted a nose turret with a 7.62mm minigun and 40mm grenade launcher, and carried external rocket pods and missile rails on stub wings. The AH-1G Huey Cobra entered combat in Vietnam in August 1967. In the first year of operations, Cobra crews fired 14 million rounds of 7.62mm ammunition and 159,000 2.75-inch rockets. The attack helicopter had arrived as a distinct capability separate from armed utility helicopters. The Marine Corps' AH-1Z Viper, the current production variant, shares 84% parts commonality with the UH-1Y Venom it operates alongside. First delivered in 2010, the AH-1Z remains in full production for the Marine Corps and export customers. The design that was built in 6 months to answer a Vietnam emergency has been continuously in production for nearly 6 decades. The Boeing CH-47. Chinook has been in continuous production longer than any other military helicopter in the world, entering service in 1962 and still being manufactured in the CH-47F Block 2 configuration as of 2024. The tandem rotor design produces 50,000 pounds of gross weight capability that no single rotor helicopter of comparable size could match. The Chinook's cargo floor is 21 feet long. A UH-60 Black Hawk fits inside it with room to spare. In Vietnam, CH-47s provided the heavy lift that made the airmobile concept operationally viable. The famous stump jumper operation on March 22, 1968 saw CH-47s lift 11 artillery pieces from fire support base to fire support base to support the Battle of Hue. CH-47s also recovered 11,000 aircraft damaged or downed in Vietnam, saving an estimated $3 billion in airframes through sling-load evacuation. The Afghan war validated the Chinook's high-altitude performance beyond all expectations. At 10,000 to 14,000 foot operating altitudes throughout the Hindu Kush, the Chinook was one of very few helicopters that could perform reliably. The current CH-47F Block II delivers 22% more power than the original CH-47A. The Piasecki configuration from 1962 is still the most efficient heavy-lift helicopter ever produced. The Sikorsky CH-54 Tahe, the Sky Crane, was designed around a single operational requirement: lift the heaviest possible load with nothing but the helicopter itself. The skeletal pod and boom fuselage with no conventional cabin eliminated every pound of structure not directly contributing to the rotor system or cruise station. The pilots could be reversed in their seats to face aft and look directly down through a belly window at the load being slung below. No subsequent helicopter design has matched the CH-54's precision sling load control in the heavy lift category. 97 CH-54s recovered 386 aircraft from Vietnam's jungle and mountain terrain during the conflict, the equivalent of $1.5 billion in airframes that would otherwise have been abandoned. The CH-54B's 20,000-pound sling load capacity meant it could lift a CH-47 Chinook with a 5,000-pound payload attached. The Tahe's commercial successor, the Sikorsky S-64 aircrane, remains in production for firefighting and construction applications, the same airframe performing the same precision sling load mission in civilian contexts. The military retired the Tahe after Desert Storm. 97 military CH-54s were built. The design's operational logic outlived the aircraft that implemented it. The Hughes OH-6 Cayusa, called the LOACH by every crew who flew it, won the Army's 1961 light observation helicopter competition by a bid so low that Hughes lost money on every airframe delivered. The $29,600 unit price that won the contract was below cost. Hughes calculated that follow-on contracts for parts, engines and upgrades would generate the margin the initial sale forfeited. The Army received 1,434 aircraft at production loss. In Vietnam, the OH-6 flew the most dangerous mission in Army aviation: Pink Team operations, in which an OH-6 flew at treetop level to draw enemy fire while an AH-1 Cobra orbiting above identified and engaged the source. The OH-6 deliberately made itself a target. OH-6 pilots developed defensive flying techniques, banking hard into confined spaces, using terrain masking, exploiting the aircraft's tight turning radius that no flight manual described because no flight manual had anticipated the mission. The egg-shaped fuselage was designed by engineer Dick Barnett with crash survivability as a primary criterion. The monocoque egg structure distributed impact loads in ways that conventional fuselages did not. OH-6 crews survived crashes that should have been fatal. 1,434 OH-6s served in Vietnam. The crews who flew them into fire trusted the egg to bring them home. It usually did. The Bell OH-58. Kiowa won the Army's 1968 light observation helicopter re-competition after Hughes Aircraft's production problems with the OH-6 created delivery shortfalls that the Vietnam War's operational tempo could not accommodate. Bell's Model 206. Jet Ranger commercial design was modified minimally for military service, resulting in an aircraft that lacked the OHE-6's crash, survivability and agility, but could be delivered immediately in the quantities the Army needed. The procurement decision was driven by schedule, not performance. The Kiowa arrived to fill a gap and stayed for 48 years. The OH-58D Kiowa Warrior, developed under the Army Helicopter Improvement Program in the 1980s, transformed the observation platform into an armed scout through the addition of a mast-mounted sight, carrying FLIR and TV cameras atop the rotor head. In Operation Desert Storm, OH-58Ds flew the opening moments of the conflict, launching Hellfire missiles at Iraqi early warning radar sites at H-hour on January 17, 1991. The first shots fired in the war. The Army retired the OH-58D in 2017 without a direct replacement, creating a scout capability gap. The Armed Aerial Scout program was cancelled in 2013. The Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft program selected the Bell 360 Invictus in 2022, then cancelled it in March 2024. The gap between 2017 and a projected replacement around 2030 represents over a decade without dedicated armed scouts. The Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk replaced the UH-1 Iroquois as the Army's primary utility helicopter and corrected every operational deficiency that Vietnam had exposed. The design requirement, survivable in an air defense environment that included radar-guided missiles and cannon, produced an aircraft with crash-resistant fuel system, ballistic-tolerant structure, and the ability to sustain 23mm cannon hits in critical systems and continue flying. The twin-engine configuration replaced the UH-1's single engine for survivability. A single hit that destroyed one T-700 could knock down the aircraft. On October 3rd and 4th, 1993, two UH-60 Black Hawks, Super 6-1 and Super 6-4, were shot down over Mogadishu by RPG fire during Task Force Rangers' raid on a militia compound. 18 American soldiers died in the subsequent battle to recover the downed crews and aircraft, the costliest U.S. ground combat since Vietnam. The aircraft performed as designed. The mission planning had underestimated the threat. The SH-60 Seahawk and MH-60 Romeo naval variants serve as the U.S. Navy's primary shipboard helicopter for anti-submarine warfare, surface warfare, and search and rescue. 4,000 have been built across all variants. The UH-60M remains in full production, with projected deliveries extending through 2030. The most capable utility helicopter the United States has ever produced has been in continuous production and combat service for 45 years. The Boeing AH-64 Apache was designed for a specific adversary on a specific battlefield, the mass Soviet tank formations that NATO planners projected crossing the Fulda Gap in West Germany, and delivered a weapon system of such lethality that no subsequent threat environment it was actually deployed against matched the enemy. It had been optimized to fight. The 30mm M230 chain gun, 16 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, and TADS/PNVS night targeting system gave a two-man crew the ability to detect, identify, and destroy 16 main battle tanks in a single engagement profile at night in any weather. Operation Desert Storm on January 17, 1991, gave the Apache its first combat use. 8. AH-64. As from the 101st Aviation Brigade struck two Iraqi air defense radar sites at H-hour, creating the radar gap through which the first coalition airstrikes flew. The 101st Aviation Brigade's Apache Battalion destroyed 278 Iraqi armored vehicles and 923 other military vehicles in 100 hours of ground combat without losing an aircraft to enemy action. The AH-64E Guardian current production integrates unmanned aircraft teaming. The pilot can control up to 6 unmanned aircraft simultaneously from the cockpit. 2,400 have been built for 16 nations. The machine, designed to fight Soviet tanks, has spent its service life fighting insurgents, militias, and non-state actors, and has been comprehensively lethal against every one of them. The Sikorsky CH-53C Stallion and its 3-engine descendant, the CH-53E Super Stallion, constitute the U.S. Marine Corps' heavy lift backbone, a lineage spanning 58 years from the 2-engine CH-53A that entered Marine service in 1966 to the CH-53K King Stallion that began fleet deliveries in 2021. The Marine Corps' amphibious assault doctrine requires a helicopter that can lift light armored vehicles, artillery, and engineer equipment from ship to shore faster than surface landing craft. The CH-53E's 36,000-pound external sling load capacity makes it the only Western helicopter capable of lifting a fully loaded M198 howitzer with ammunition and crew. During Operation Enduring Freedom, CH-53Es from Marine Medium Helicopter Squadron 162 conducted Operation Rhino on November 25, 2001, flying 400 miles from USS Peleliu to seize an airstrip near Kandahar, requiring aerial refueling from KC-13OEs. The CH-53K King Stallion, delivered from 2021, carries 3 times the payload of the CH-53E through upgraded GET-408 engines producing 7,500 shaft horsepower each and a fully fly-by-wire flight control system. 200 King Stallions are planned for the Marine Corps through 2030. The design philosophy that Sikorsky established in 1962, maximum payload through maximum power, remains the answer to every question the Marines ask about heavy lift. The Boeing MH-6 Littlebird operates exclusively with the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the U.S. Army's dedicated Special Operations Aviation Unit known as the Night Stalkers. Based on the OH-6 Cayuse commercial airframe, the Littlebird carries 6 operators on external benches, 3 per side, who ride with weapons ready to engage immediately upon landing or from hover. The aircraft can land in spaces no other military helicopter can access, insert directly into target buildings, and depart before conventional forces could have reached the objective by any other means. The 161st SAW's MH-6 flew the Grenada insertion in 1983, the Panama operations in 1989, and the Mogadishu rescue missions on October 3rd and 4th, 1993, extracting wounded operators under direct fire after the Super 6-1 crash. In the Mogadishu battle, MH-6 pilots flew through the crash sites repeatedly at rooftop level, extracting casualties one at a time while AH-6 gunships suppressed militia fire from ground level. Production numbers and aircraft counts for the 166th SAW fleet remain classified. The MH-6M, the current variant, incorporates FLIR advanced communications and the ability to carry newer weapons packages on the AH-6 armed variant, including miniguns and Hellfire missiles. The aircraft that look like commercial helicopters fly missions that nothing else in the inventory can execute. The Sikorsky MH-53 Parvay-Low was the most sophisticated special operations aircraft in the U.S. Air Force inventory through 3 decades. A combat search and rescue and special operations helicopter that accumulated more classified mission records than any other rotorcraft in American history. The MH-53J Pave-Low 3, equipped with terrain-following radar, FLIR GPS, integrated inertial navigation and 3 defensive machine guns, could penetrate enemy air defenses at low altitude at night in adverse weather. On April the 24th and 25th, 1980, 8 HH-53s launched from USS Nimitz for Operation Eagle Claw, the Iran hostage rescue. 3 helicopters suffered mechanical failures in flight. The mission was aborted at Desert One staging area in Iran. During the abort, an RH-53D collided with a C-130, killing 8 Americans. The disaster led directly to the creation of U.S. Special Operations Command and the 161st SAW. MH-53 J. Pave-Lows flew the opening minutes of Desert Storm on January 17, 1991, leading AH-64 Apaches to the Iraqi radar sites that were the first targets of the war, providing GPS navigation to aircraft that lacked it. Retired in 2008, with the CV-22 Osprey replacing the long-range insertion role, the MH-53 closed a 40-year chapter in Air Force Special Operations aviation with a classified record that its successors have not yet equaled. The Boeing Sikorsky RAH-66 Comanche was cancelled on February 23, 2004, after 21 years of development and $7 billion in expenditure, the largest helicopter program cancellation in U.S. history and the most expensive military aviation program that produced 0 operational aircraft. The RAH-66 was designed to be the stealthiest helicopter ever built. Facetted composite airframe, retractable landing gear and weapon bays, rotor blade shaping that reduced radar and acoustic signature. The Army's stated justification for cancellation was the changed threat environment post-September 11, 2001. The Comanche was designed for high-intensity conventional warfare against Soviet-era air defenses. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq required different capabilities. The $14.6 billion savings from cancellation were redirected to UH-60 upgrades, UAV procurement, and Apache modernization. Both main arguments proved prescient. The Army retired the OH-58D in 2017 without a replacement. The Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft program restarted the armed scout requirement in 2019, 15 years after the Comanche was cancelled, and was itself cancelled in March 2024. $7 billion spent. 2 prototypes built. The scout gap the Comanche was supposed to fill remains unfilled. The Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey killed 30 people in 4 crashes between 1991 and 2000 and was grounded twice before achieving initial operational capability in 2007, a development program that consumed $30 billion, 18 years, and a body count that conventional test programs rarely match. The tiltrotor concept that produces its 316 miles per hour cruise speed and 879-mile unrefueled range is also the engineering source of its most dangerous failure mode, vortex ring state, in which a tiltrotor descending in its own downwash at low speed can lose lift catastrophically with insufficient altitude for recovery. The MV-22B entered Marine service in 2007 and flew its first combat deployment to Iraq in September 2007. The operational capability advantage over the CH-46C Knight it replaced was unambiguous. The V-22 was 3 times faster, had 4 times the range, and could operate at altitudes the CH-46 could not reach. In Afghanistan, V-22s routinely conducted missions at 8,000 to 11,000 foot altitudes that would have required multiple CH-46 trips. The CV-22B Air Force variant replaced the MH-53J Pave Low in the Special Operations Long-Range Infiltration role. Development costs $30 billion. Operational cost per flight hour exceeds $10,000. Whether the capability justifies the cost is debated across every defense review cycle. The aircraft continues in production regardless of the debate. The Sikorsky MH-60R Romeo is the most capable anti-submarine and surface warfare helicopter in service with any navy, the product of a 1990s Common Cockpit program that sought to replace 6 separate naval helicopter variants, with 2 using shared avionics, flight controls, and maintenance procedures to reduce life cycle costs. The MH-60R carries the APS-147 multimode radar AN/A QS-22, airborne low-frequency sonar, acoustic processing systems, and the capability to employ AGM-114 Hellfire Mk5-4 torpedoes and M299 launcher simultaneously. A single MH-60R can execute anti-submarine prosecution, surface vessel surveillance, over-the-horizon targeting for ship-launched missiles, and search and rescue without configuration change. The result is a 2-pilot crew executing missions that previously required 3 separate aircraft types and 6 crew members. The MH-60S Nighthawk supports the Combat Logistics Force, vertically replenishing ships at sea, conducting combat search and rescue, and providing airborne mine countermeasures. Together, the R and S variants replaced the SH-60B, SH-60F, HH-60H, CH-46D, UH-3H, and HH-1N, consolidating 6 variants into 2. 350 have been delivered. Production continues through the late 2020s. The Army's future. Vertical Lift program launched in 2019 to replace the OH-58D Kiowa with a future attack reconnaissance aircraft and the UH-60 Black Hawk with a future long-range assault aircraft. Bell's 360 Invictus won the FARA competition in December 2022. Bell's Vi-280 Valor Tiltrotor won the FLRAA competition in December 2022. Its 280 miles per hour fixed-wing cruise speed and ability to carry 14 troops to 2,100-mile ferry range, presenting capabilities no current helicopter can match. On March 8, 2024, the Army cancelled the FARA program, eliminating the Bell 360 Invictus before it completed development and abandoning the armed Scout replacement requirement that had driven helicopter procurement for 20 years. The estimated $43 billion life cycle cost had grown from an original estimate of $16 billion. The Army redirected the funding to air defense, long-range precision fires, and drones. The FLRAA program continues. The V-280 Valor, if it enters production in the early 2030s, will replace the UH-60 Black Hawk with a tilt rotor that resolves the fundamental limitation that conventional helicopters have faced since 1944. The compromise between low-speed hovering ability and high-speed cruise efficiency. Whether the Army's budget will sustain the program through production is the question that every future vertical lift milestone answers partially, and none has resolved definitively.